The thunder of gunfire shattered the night. Lieutenant Colonel Morgan Hayes pressed her back against the crumbling stone wall, feeling warm blood trickle between her shoulder blades. Not hers, at least not yet. Her breath came in controlled, measured intervals as she counted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 hostiles, 1 magazine, 7 rounds. The math wasn't ideal. "Give it up, Hayes!" The voice echoed across the ravine, distorted by the wind but unmistakably American. "There's nowhere left to run." Morgan's fingers traced the emblem etched into her combat knife, the winged thunderbolt of Air Force Special Tactics. First there. The motto had guided her through 18 years of impossible missions. Tonight would be no different. She calculated trajectory, wind resistance, and probability in a heartbeat, then burst from cover in a fluid roll. Her first 2 shots found their marks before the enemy even registered movement. The third caught a shadow mid-stride. 2 rounds impacted the earth near her head as she slid behind a fallen log. Return fire, professional, measured. These weren't ordinary hunters. Morgan felt a familiar calm settle over her, the crystalline clarity that had kept her alive from Yemen to North Korea to places that didn't exist on any civilian map. Her hand reached back, touching the special ops tattoo between her shoulder blades, a reminder of who she was beneath whatever cover identity she wore. "You can't save them all, Morgan," the voice called again, closer now. "Some prices are too high, even for you." Her jaw tightened. That voice. She knew it from somewhere. A grenade arced through the darkness, its deadly parabola ending 3 feet from her position. Morgan moved without hesitation, her body reacting before conscious thought. The world exploded into light and fury, and then darkness. The morning mist clung to the hills of Harlan County like a reluctant ghost, unwilling to surrender to the rising Kentucky sun. Through this ethereal veil, a weathered Jeep Cherokee climbed the winding mountain road, its tires gripping the worn asphalt with practiced precision. Behind the wheel sat Morgan Hayes, her auburn hair caught in a simple ponytail, her sharp blue eyes constantly scanning the road ahead. At 42, Morgan carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen more of the world than most. Her face, though strikingly beautiful with high cheekbones and clear eyes, bore the subtle weathering of someone who had spent years under harsh suns in faraway lands. To the casual observer, she was simply the woman who had moved to town 3 months ago and started the reliable delivery service, a godsend for the elderly and isolated families scattered throughout the hollers and ridges of coal country. The radio crackled with static before a country song broke through, something about "was I in America" and better days gone by. Morgan's lips quirked in a half-smile at the irony. Her last deployment had been anything but godly, and what she'd done in service to America wasn't the stuff of feel-good ballads. The Jeep rounded the final bend, revealing the small town of Harlan, nestled in the valley below. From this vantage point, Morgan could see it all. The main street, with its brick buildings dating back to more prosperous mining days, the church steeple rising above the tree line, and the scattered homes that climbed partway up the surrounding hillsides. Her eyes, however, were drawn to the new construction site on the far ridge, where Apex Development had begun clearing land for what they called an eco-luxury resort. Morgan's jaw tightened. She reached for her travel mug, taking a long sip of black coffee, never taking her eyes off the site. The nightmares had come again last night, sandy terrain replaced by Kentucky hillsides, but the faces of the dead remained the same. 8 years since Yemen, and still they visited her in the darkness. Her satellite phone had vibrated at 0400 hours, with a message that made this sleepy town suddenly the center of her universe. Confirmation on Apex, Shell Corporation traced to Kareem Holdings. Known ties to Yemen cell from Operation Sandstorm. Previous intel suggests weapons movement through Appalachian Corridor. Continue surveillance. Authorization for Phase 2 pending. Command out. The Yemen connection was what had jolted her fully awake. Not just another assignment. This was personal now. Morgan had lost 4 team members in the Yemen operation. Their deaths had been officially classified as operational casualties, but she had known there was more to the story. Intelligence leaks, betrayal, a mission that had been compromised before it began. And now, somehow, the ghost of Yemen had followed her to this Kentucky mountainside. With practiced ease, She guided the Jeep down the winding road into town. Early risers were already gathering at Miner's Rest, the cafe that served as the beating heart of Harlan. Morgan parked across the street, her eyes automatically scanning the area, noting the positions of vehicles, identifying potential vantage points, mentally marking exit routes. Old habits from a life most here couldn't imagine. The weight of the concealed Sig Sauer P365 at the small of her back was reassuring, a constant companion for over 2 decades. She reached into the back seat for her delivery log and a small package, then headed toward the cafe's entrance. The bell above the door announced her arrival, and several heads turned her way. Some nodded in greeting, others returned to their conversations. Morgan had mastered the art of being forgettable, friendly enough to avoid suspicion, reserved enough to prevent deep connections. It was a delicate balance she had maintained throughout her career, though sometimes she wondered what it would be like to walk into a room as herself, just once. Behind the counter stood Mike Jennings, his 70 years etched into the lines of his face like the topography of the surrounding mountains. The cafe owner wiped his hands on a dish towel and greeted her with a warm smile that reached his eyes. "Morning, Morgan. Early start again?" "The packages don't deliver themselves," she replied, returning his smile with practiced ease. "Plus, I've got to run up to Crestwood. That road gets tricky once the afternoon heat kicks in." Mike nodded knowingly. Crestwood was the wealthiest neighborhood in the county, where the mining executives and professionals lived in homes that looked down, both literally and figuratively, on the town below. It was also suspiciously close to the Apex development. "Got your usual ready." Mike placed a to-go cup on the counter and turned to the warming tray behind him. "And the cinnamon roll you pretend you don't want every Monday." Morgan allowed herself a genuine chuckle. "My weekly sin. Keep exposing me like that, and I'll lose my mysterious newcomer status." As Mike wrapped the pastry, Morgan's gaze drifted to the shadow box mounted behind the counter. Inside was a faded Army Ranger tab, several medals, and a combat patch that told the story of a younger Mike's service during the Gulf War. She had noticed it her first day in town but had never mentioned it. Professional courtesy from one warrior to another. A flash memory hit her, the dusty operations room in Yemen, the intelligence officer with Ranger tabs on his jacket, the one who had changed the extraction coordinates at the last minute, the officer whose face she never saw clearly but whose voice still haunted her nightmares. "You all right there?" Mike's voice pulled her back. "Looked like you went somewhere else for a second." Morgan blinked, restoring her cover personality instantly. "Just calculating my route. Too much coffee, not enough sleep." "Heard there was some commotion up at the Sullivan place last night," Mike said, his voice dropping slightly as he slid the bag across the counter. "Mrs. Peterson said she saw those motorcycles again." The motorcycles belonged to the Iron Wolves, a gang that had appeared in Harlan around the same time Apex Development started buying property. They claimed to be security contractors, but Morgan had recognized their type immediately. Private military contractors gone rogue, mercenaries without a war, men who had developed a taste for violence and found civilian life unable to satisfy it. "Sullivan still holding out?" Morgan asked casually, though she already knew the answer. Her nighttime surveillance had mapped every holdout property in the county. "For now," Mike's weathered hands gripped the counter edge. "But they're offering triple market value now. Hard for folks to say no, especially with the mines all but closed." The cafe door opened, bringing with it a gust of cool morning air, and Emma Lawson, the local high school English teacher. At 35, Emma represented what was increasingly rare in Harlan, someone who had left for college but chosen to return. Her bright smile and genuine warmth had made her one of the few people Morgan allowed herself to engage with beyond superficial pleasantries. "Morgan, I was hoping to catch you," Emma said, adjusting her glasses. "My grandmother's birthday is Saturday, and I was wondering if you could deliver something to her up in Pine Ridge. I'm stuck with school meetings all day." "Sure thing. Just drop it by my place Friday evening," Morgan replied, mentally noting that Pine Ridge offered an excellent vantage point of the back entrance to the Apex construction site, a location she had been meaning to survey more closely. The door chimed again, but this time the atmosphere in the cafe shifted perceptibly. Conversations died mid-sentence, and the clinking of cutlery against plates ceased. Morgan didn't need to turn around to know who had entered. The sudden tension told her everything. Ray Donovan stood in the doorway, his imposing 6'3" frame filling the space. Unlike the leather-clad men who typically accompanied him, Donovan wore a tailored gray suit beneath a black overcoat. The long scar that ran from his right eye to his jawline seemed even more pronounced in the morning light, a pale line cutting through his tan skin. Two men flanked him, their leather jackets bearing the Iron Wolf's insignia, a snarling wolf's head with blood-red eyes. Something about Donovan's stance triggered Morgan's memory again. The way he distributed his weight, favoring his right leg slightly. A combat indicator, the kind of detail most civilians would never notice, but that screamed professional to her trained eye. "Good morning, folks," Donovan said, his deep voice carrying a forced pleasantness that fooled no one. "Beautiful day in Harlan, isn't it?" No one responded. Morgan kept her back to him, methodically placing her delivery log into her messenger bag, every sense heightened. She felt Donovan's eyes on her back, measuring, assessing. Years of training kept her movements casual, her breathing steady. "Mr. Jennings," Donovan continued, approaching the counter, "I believe we had a conversation pending about your property's future." Mike's expression hardened. "Nothing pending on my end. Told you last week this place isn't for sale." Donovan smiled, but the expression never reached his eyes. "Everything has a price, Mr. Jennings. It's just a matter of finding the right number." He placed a business card on the counter. "Our offer just went up. Again, I suggest you consider it before market conditions change." The threat lingered in the air, unspoken but unmistakable. Morgan finally turned, meeting Donovan's gaze directly for the first time. His eyes flickered to her, then away, dismissing her as irrelevant. Just another local, insignificant to his plans. It was a mistake many had made before. Few had lived to realize it. "Ms. Hayes, isn't it?" Donovan said, surprising her by knowing her name. "The delivery service. Apex could use someone familiar with the local roads. When we complete our development, there will be plenty of opportunities for someone with your limited skill set." The condescension in his voice was thick, designed to provoke. Morgan had been interrogated by experts in the darkest corners of the world. This amateur attempt at intimidation almost made her smile. But as Donovan shifted his weight, the morning light caught his wristwatch, an expensive timepiece with a distinctive bezel. Morgan's blood froze. She knew that watch. A custom Breitling Avenger with a specific modification to the chronograph. She had seen it before, in Yemen on the wrist of the intelligence officer who had disappeared after the operation went bad. The pieces began to align in her mind, but her expression revealed nothing as she replied evenly, "I appreciate the offer, but I prefer being my own boss." Donovan's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Independence. Admirable, if increasingly impractical in today's economy. He turned back to Mike. "Thursday. I'll expect your answer by then." With that, he and his men left, the bell above the door chiming with inappropriate cheerfulness in their wake. Only after the sound of motorcycles faded did the cafe gradually return to life, conversations resuming in hushed tones. "One day, someone's going to wipe that smug look off his face," Emma muttered, staring at the door. Morgan took a sip of her coffee, her mind already calculating, planning. "Maybe sooner than he thinks," she said softly, almost to herself. Mike gave her a curious look, but Morgan simply smiled, lifted her bag, and headed for the door. She had deliveries to make, and a ghost from Yemen to investigate. The mission had just become deeply personal, and somewhere in her mind, the ghosts of her fallen teammates seemed to whisper, "First there." Dusk settled over Harlan County like a bruise, the sky transitioning from amber to deep purple as Morgan guided her Jeep along a narrow fire road that snaked up the eastern ridge. Her official deliveries had been completed hours ago, but her real work was just beginning. She parked in a small clearing, sheltered by towering pines, concealing the vehicle from both the road below and the air above. From her backpack, Morgan retrieved a high-powered spotting scope and a small thermal imaging device, equipment that would raise eyebrows if discovered, but could be explained away as hunting gear to the unquestioning. As she secured the Jeep, a memory flashed unbidden. Captain Reyes adjusting his scope on that rooftop in Sana'a, laughing about how they'd go hunting together when they got home. 4 hours later, he'd bled out in her arms, victim of an ambush that shouldn't have happened. "Something's wrong," he'd whispered. They knew we were coming. Morgan pushed the memory away, focusing on the present. 20 minutes of careful hiking brought her to a rocky outcrop that offered an unobstructed view of the Apex construction site. In the gathering darkness, the site should have been dormant, the workers long gone for the day. Instead, it buzzed with activity, portable floodlights casting harsh shadows as trucks moved along the newly graded access road. Morgan settled behind a fallen log, adjusting the spotting scope with practiced precision. Through the lens, she could make out shipping containers being unloaded from flatbed trucks, standard construction equipment at first glance. But when the third container was open, the contents made her pulse quicken. Inside were not construction materials, but long metallic crates with military markings partially obscured by fresh paint. She recognized the dimensions immediately. Weapons crates, similar to those she had seen in forward operating bases across 3 continents. Morgan activated the thermal imager, scanning the site systematically. The heat signatures confirmed her suspicions. Armed men positioned at regular intervals around the perimeter, displaying the disciplined spacing of military training, not construction security. Morgan documented everything with the small camera built into her watch, specially designed to function in near darkness. As she was about to retreat, movement at the far end of the site caught her attention. A black SUV with tinted windows approached, stopping before a prefabricated office structure. The man who emerged carried himself with the unmistakable bearing of someone accustomed to authority. Even from this distance, Morgan recognized Lucas Reed, the public face of Apex Development. The corporate executive was impeccably dressed, even at this late hour, his silver hair gleaming under the floodlights. What surprised her was the man who greeted him, Ray Donovan, now dressed in tactical gear rather than his customary suit. The 2 men spoke briefly before disappearing into the office. Morgan adjusted her position, trying to get a better angle on the building's windows, when the snap of a twig behind her froze her in place. Years of combat instinct took over. In one fluid motion, she secured the observation equipment and drew her sidearm, rolling to face the threat. "Whoa, easy there," came a familiar voice, tinged with surprise and a newfound respect. "It's just me." Sheriff Tom Walker stood 10 feet away, hands raised slightly in a placating gesture. At 52, the local lawman still maintained the physique of the college football player he had once been, though his dark hair was now heavily salted with gray. Morgan holstered her weapon smoothly, mind racing through potential explanations. "Sheriff, you startled me." "Apparently," Walker replied, eyeing the spot where her gun had disappeared beneath her jacket. "Mind telling me what brings you up here after dark? This is private property, you know." "Is it?" Morgan countered, rising to her feet with casual grace. "I thought this was still county land. The state forest boundary markers are just over that ridge." Walker studied her for a long moment. "You seem to know these woods pretty well for someone who's only been in town 3 months." "I deliver to every corner of this county," she replied with a shrug. "Good sense of direction comes with the job." "Uh-huh." The sheriff clearly wasn't buying it. "And the military-grade optics I just saw you pack away, those standard delivery equipment too?" Morgan's mind calculated rapidly. The sheriff had seen too much to brush off with a simple excuse, but he hadn't immediately moved to arrest her. That suggested he might have his own suspicions about what was happening in Harlan. "Hunting gear," she said, maintaining her cover. "Scouting locations for turkey season." "At night? With thermal imaging?" Walker shook his head. "Ms. Hayes, I may be just a small-town sheriff, but I did serve 4 years with the state police. I know surveillance equipment when I see it." Morgan sighed, deciding to give him a partial truth. "Fine. I've been documenting the Apex construction. They're operating outside permitted hours and bringing in equipment that wasn't in their environmental impact statement. And why would a delivery driver care about that? Because I used to be an environmental compliance officer in Colorado." Morgan lied smoothly. "Old habits die hard." Walker considered this, then gestured toward the site below. "See anything interesting?" The question seemed genuine, giving Morgan a moment of hope. Could the sheriff be a potential ally? "Nothing that would stand up in court," she hedged. "Yet." Walker nodded slowly. "You're not the only one with concerns about Apex. They blew into town with too much money and too few questions, Started buying up land before their permits were even filed. He paused, glancing down at the construction site. But they've got friends in the state capitol and enough lawyers to keep me at arm's length. So you're up here conducting your own surveillance, Morgan asked. Just a routine patrol, Walker replied with a thin smile. Checking for trespassers. The implied understanding hung between them. Morgan decided to test the waters further. Those iron wolves concern you at all? They seem to be Apex's unofficial enforcement arm. Walker's expression darkened. They concern me plenty, but without cause for arrest, my hands are tied. The moment they slip up, though, he left the sentence unfinished. And if someone were to provide you with evidence of illegal activity? I'd be obligated to investigate, Walker replied carefully, through proper channels. Morgan nodded, understanding the subtext. The sheriff was honest but constrained by legal procedures that Apex had likely already compromised. I should get going, she said, shouldering her backpack. Early deliveries tomorrow. Walker studied her for another long moment. Ms. Hayes, whatever you're really doing up here, be careful. Donovan and his crew aren't just ordinary troublemakers. There's something wrong about them. Military wrong. The comment caught Morgan by surprise. The sheriff was more perceptive than she'd given him credit for. I'm always careful, Sheriff, she replied. It's a dangerous world out there. Even in sleepy little Harlan, Walker agreed. He tipped his hat slightly. Good night, Ms. Hayes. Stick to the marked trails on your way down. Some of these slopes can be treacherous in the dark. Morgan watched him disappear into the trees, his flashlight bobbing through the underbrush. Only when she was certain he was gone did she retrieve her satellite phone from a hidden compartment in her backpack. The device was untraceable, operating on military frequencies inaccessible to civilian monitoring. Her message was brief. Confirmed weapons shipment, Donovan's presence verified. Breitling Watch ID positive. Yemen connection confirmed. Local law enforcement potentially friendly but compromised. Request background check on Sheriff Thomas Walker, Harlan County, Kentucky. Send intel on Apex corporate structure. Will proceed with Phase 2 surveillance. Maverick out. As she made her way back to the Jeep, Morgan's mind worked through contingencies. The sheriff's appearance complicated matters, but might ultimately provide an advantage. If Walker could be trusted, he represented a potential legitimate avenue for action when the time came. For now, though, she would maintain her cover and continue gathering intelligence. The weapon she'd observed suggested Apex was planning something far beyond a mere real estate scam. And Donovan's presence confirmed her worst suspicions. The ghosts of Yemen had followed her to Kentucky, and this time she intended to face them head-on. The following morning brought heavy rain to Harlan County, water sluicing down the mountainsides and turning small creeks into churning torrents. Morgan welcomed the downpour. Bad weather provided cover for her next phase of reconnaissance. At precisely 5:00 a.m., before the first hint of dawn, she completed her daily exercise regimen. 100 push-ups, 100 sit-ups, in a series of combat drills that kept her reflexes razor sharp. The discipline was as much mental as physical, a ritual that centered her for whatever challenges the day might bring. As she moved through the familiar routines, Morgan's mind drifted back to her first combat deployment. She'd been 24, newly assigned to the combat control team, the only woman in her unit. They'd called her Princess behind her back, until the night their forward base was hit, and she single-handedly coordinated the airstrike that saved their position while treating 3 wounded men under heavy fire. After that, she was just Hayes, one of them, her gender irrelevant in the face of her competence. Those early years had been simpler in many ways. Clear enemies, defined missions. Not like the shadowy world of intelligence she'd entered after Yemen, where allies and adversaries often wore the same face, and mission parameters shifted like desert sand. After a quick shower, she dressed in waterproof gear suitable for a delivery driver working through a storm, her rain jacket loose enough to conceal the weapon at her back. The satellite phone had delivered a message overnight. Background check on Walker clean, 20-year law enforcement veteran, decorated state police service. No financial irregularities. One potential leverage point: daughter in medical school, significant student loans. Apex corporate structure reveals shell companies tracing to offshore accounts linked to known arms dealers. Satellite imagery shows unusual excavation pattern at site. Exercise extreme caution. Authorization for Phase 2 granted. Command out. The information confirmed Morgan's instincts about the sheriff, honest but vulnerable through his family. Apex would likely exploit such weakness if they felt threatened. The corporate structure information was more troubling, suggesting international connections beyond a simple land grab. Morgan loaded her Jeep with the day's legitimate deliveries, mostly medications for elderly residents in outlying areas, a service that had quickly made her indispensable to the community. Beneath the packages, concealed in a hidden compartment, lay the tools for her real work: advanced surveillance devices disguised as everyday objects, a set of lockpicks, and a small electronic device capable of cloning security credentials. Her first stop was the pharmacy in town, where she collected the prescription deliveries. The pharmacist, a balding man in his 60s, greeted her with relief. "Thank God you're running today, Morgan. I was afraid the storm might keep you away. Mrs. Tanner up on Miller's Ridge is waiting on her heart medication." "It'll take more than a little rain to stop me," Morgan replied with a reassuring smile. "I'll head there first." "You're a godsend to this community," the pharmacist said, handing over the carefully packaged medications. "Before you started your service, half these folks would miss doses waiting for family to visit or trying to dry to themselves in weather like this." The genuine gratitude in his voice stirred something unexpected in Morgan, a twinge of guilt for her deception. The delivery service had begun as merely a cover, a way to move freely throughout the county without suspicion. She hadn't anticipated how vital it would become to the vulnerable residents scattered across these hills. "Just doing my job," she said, tucking the packages into her waterproof bag. As Morgan turned to leave, the pharmacy door opened, bringing with it a gust of rain-laden wind and Emma Lawson, looking harried and damp despite her umbrella. "Morgan, I'm so glad I caught you," the teacher said, pushing her rain-speckled glasses up her nose. "The school's closed today because of flooding concerns, and I was wondering if you're still going near Pine Ridge. I could come with you to visit my grandmother instead of waiting till the weekend." The request presented both a complication and an opportunity. Having Emma along would limit Morgan's surveillance activities, but the teacher's local knowledge and family connections could provide valuable intelligence about the area surrounding the Apex development. "Sure, I'm heading that way after a few stops," Morgan replied. "Meet me at my place in an hour. I should be back by then to swap out some equipment." The last part wasn't entirely a lie. She did need to exchange some surveillance gear. "Perfect. I'll bring coffee and those muffins you like from the church bake sale," Emma said with a bright smile, apparently delighted at the prospect of the trip despite the weather. After Emma left, Morgan completed her first round of deliveries, navigating the rain-slick mountain roads with the skill of someone who had driven under far worse conditions. Nighttime supply runs through active combat zones had taught her to handle any terrain. Each delivery reinforced her cover while allowing her to map more of the county and note changes in the patterns of daily life. At Mrs. Tanner's isolated farmhouse, the elderly woman insisted Morgan come in out of the rain for a moment. The home sat on a ridge that offered a clear view of the valley below, including part of the Apex construction site. While Mrs. Tanner busied herself making tea, Morgan casually positioned herself near the window. "Those construction folks work even in weather like this," Mr. Tanner remarked, following Morgan's gaze as she returned with 2 steaming mugs. "Day and night sometimes, no respect for God's country or those of us trying to live peacefully in it." "Have they approached you about your land?" Morgan asked, accepting the tea with a grateful nod. The old woman's face hardened. "3 times now. Last offer was 4 times what this place is worth, and that's not counting the mineral rights thereafter." She shook her head firmly. "My husband's buried on this property, and I plan to rest beside him when my time comes. No amount of money changes that." "They're not taking the refusals well from what I hear." Mrs. Tanner snorted. "Those motorcycle thugs think they can intimidate an old woman who lived through the mine wars. My daddy faced down company men with guns. I'm not afraid of a few tattooed boys in leather." Morgan couldn't help but smile at the woman's fierce independence, a trait she'd found common among the longtime residents of these mountains. It was also why Apex was encountering more resistance than they had likely anticipated. "All the same, be careful," Morgan advised. "Call Sheriff Walker if they come around again. Tom's a good boy, but he can only do so much, Mrs. Tanner replied with the familiarity of someone who had known the sheriff since childhood. Way I hear it, Apex has the county commissioners in their pocket already. Even got Judge Harmon to fast-track their permits. The information was a useful confirmation of Morgan's suspicions about local government compromise. She made a mental note to look into Judge Harmon's financial records. After finishing her tea and promising to check on Mrs. Tanner again soon, Morgan headed back to her cabin to meet Emma. The rain had intensified, drumming on the Jeep's roof and reducing visibility to mere yards. Perfect weather for anyone wishing to remain unobserved. Morgan's cabin sat at the end of a long gravel driveway, partially hidden by a stand of ancient oaks. She had chosen it specifically for its strategic advantages: elevated position, multiple escape routes, and natural concealment. To casual observers, it appeared to be nothing more than a modest rental property suitable for a single woman with a small business. Inside, however, was a different story. Behind locked doors, the spare bedroom had been converted into a command center, with secure communications equipment, weapons, and surveillance monitoring systems. The living areas remained deliberately ordinary, a cover maintained down to the family photos of people who didn't exist and dog-eared paperbacks she would never read. Morgan had just enough time to secure sensitive equipment and ensure all surveillance feeds were recording before Emma's small Honda struggled up the muddy driveway. She watched through the window as the teacher dashed through the downpour, a canvas bag clutched protectively against her chest. "Some storm, huh?" Emma said breathlessly as Morgan let her in. "They're saying Miller's Creek might flood if it keeps up like this." "All the more reason to check on your grandmother sooner rather than later," Morgan replied, taking the dripping bag from Emma's hands. Inside were the promised muffins and 2 large travel mugs of coffee. While Emma dried off, Morgan gathered her delivery bags and the keys to the Jeep. Her mind was already mapping the route they would take, one that would allow her to place surveillance devices at key locations under the guise of making routine stops. "Ready when you are," Emma announced, having exchanged her soaked jacket for one of Morgan's spare raincoats. "Thanks for letting me tag along. Gran will be thrilled to have visitors in this weather. She gets lonely up there, especially since Grandpa passed." "How long has she lived in Pine Ridge?" Morgan asked as they headed back out into the rain. "All her life. The house has been in the family for 4 generations. Emma's pride was evident. She knows every inch of those mountains. Used to be a guide for hikers and hunters back in the day. Morgan filed away this information. An elderly resident with intimate knowledge of the landscape around Pine Ridge, exactly where Apex was focusing their development, could be an invaluable intelligence resource. As they drove through the storm, Emma pointed out landmarks and shared stories about growing up in Harlan. Morgan listened attentively, both for her cover and because the information provided context for her mission. Understanding the community dynamics was crucial for predicting how events might unfold. They were crossing the old iron bridge over Blackwater River when Emma suddenly gripped the dashboard. "Morgan, stop! Look there, by the riverbank." Morgan slowed the Jeep, peering through the rain-streaked windshield. At first, she saw nothing but the swollen river and debris caught against the bank. Then movement caught her eye, a flash of color against the muddy water. "Someone's down there," she said, pulling the Jeep to the side of the road and activating the hazard lights. Without hesitation, Morgan was out of the vehicle and moving toward the riverbank, her training kicking in automatically. The rain pelted her face as she scanned the scene, quickly identifying a pickup truck partially submerged in the rising waters. Its front end was crumpled against a large boulder, the windshield shattered. A man was slumped over the steering wheel, unmoving. Another figure, a teenage boy, was attempting to open the driver's side door, struggling against the current that was already reaching his waist. "Emma, call 911, Morgan shouted, already descending the slippery embankment. Her mind calculated angles, water speed, and risk factors with the precision of someone who had conducted water rescues under enemy fire. The boy looked up as she approached, his face pale with fear and cold. "I can't get the door open," he cried over the roar of the water. "It's my dad. He won't wake up." Morgan reached them, bracing herself against the current. The water was numbingly cold, but she pushed the sensation aside, focusing entirely on the task at hand. The driver's door was indeed jammed, the frame bent from impact. "Move to the passenger side," she instructed the boy. "Try that door while I work on this one." As the teenager sloshed around the vehicle, Morgan assessed the situation with clinical detachment. The driver appeared unconscious but breathing, a gash visible on his forehead. The rising water had reached the bottom of the windows. They had minutes, not hours. Drawing on strength honed through years of special operations training, Morgan gripped the door handle and braced her foot against the truck's body. With a controlled burst of force, she pulled, feeling the metal groan but not give. The boy returned, panic in his eyes. Other doors stuck too. Morgan made a quick decision. Break the window, use your elbow, aim for the corner. The boy hesitated, then nodded. Morgan waded to the passenger side to help him, demonstrating the technique. Together they shattered the window, clearing the glass away quickly. I'm going in, Morgan said, already pulling herself through the opening. Inside, the water was up to the seats. The driver, a man in his 50s, groaned as she checked his pulse and pupils. Possible concussion. Neck seems stable, she assessed aloud, her voice calm and professional. We need to get his seatbelt off and pull him out before the water rises further. Working quickly, Morgan released the seatbelt and carefully maneuvered the man toward the broken window. His size made the task difficult in the confined space, but years of extracting wounded comrades from tight spots had prepared her well. When I push him through, grab under his arms, she instructed the boy. Keep his head above water and move toward the bank. Don't try to climb up yet. With methodical precision, Morgan guided the unconscious man through the window. The teenager, despite his fear, followed her instructions perfectly, supporting his father as Morgan emerged from the truck. The current's getting stronger, she observed, feeling the water's pull increasing. We need to move parallel to the bank until we reach that fallen tree. It'll give us a way to climb up. Supporting the injured man between them, Morgan and the boy fought their way through the rising water. Emma had made her way partway down the embankment and was calling to them, pointing toward the best path. When they finally re-entered the shore, Morgan immediately began first aid, checking the man's airway and placing him in the recovery position. In the distance, sirens wailed, growing louder. The boy collapsed beside his father, shivering violently. Thank you, he managed through chattering teeth. I didn't know what to do. Morgan removed her jacket and wrapped it around the teenager's shoulders. You did exactly right. You stayed with him and called for help. Only when paramedics arrived did Morgan step back, suddenly aware of the small crowd that had gathered despite the rain. Emma stood nearby, her expression a mixture of shock and admiration. Where did you learn to do all that? Emma asked as they watched the paramedics load the injured man into the ambulance. Morgan shrugged, falling back on her cover story. Swift water rescue course, part of my environmental officer training in Colorado. Emma studied her with newfound curiosity. You know, for a delivery driver, you've got some pretty unusual skills. Just lucky timing, Morgan deflected, leading them back to the Jeep. We should get moving. Your grandmother's probably wondering where you are. As they continued their journey, Morgan was acutely aware that she had revealed more of her capabilities than intended. The rescue had been instinctive. She couldn't have stood by and watched civilians in danger, but it had exposed aspects of her training that a normal delivery driver wouldn't possess. Emma was too intelligent not to notice. The question was whether her suspicions would become a liability, or if, like Sheriff Walker, she might prove to be a potential ally. For now, Morgan would continue her mission. The rain had provided one unexpected advantage. The accident had established her as someone willing to risk herself for others, further cementing her acceptance in the community. And acceptance meant access, exactly what she needed to uncover whatever apex was hiding in the mountains of Harlan County. By late afternoon, the rain had diminished to a gentle drizzle, leaving the mountains shrouded in mist. Morgan and Emma had completed their visit to Pine Ridge, where Emma's grandmother, a sharp-minded octogenarian named Ruth Lawson, had provided them with homemade stew, and more valuably for Morgan, decades of local knowledge. That ridge where they're building, Ruth had said, pointing out her kitchen window toward the distant apex site, it's honeycombed with old mining tunnels. Not on any official maps, mind you. Company kept those secret after the cave-in of '64 killed those 9 men. The information was a critical piece of intelligence. Underground access points could explain how Apex was moving equipment undetected and provide Morgan with potential infiltration routes. Now, as they headed back toward town, Emma dozed in the passenger seat, exhausted from the emotional day. Morgan drove carefully, her mind processing everything she'd learned while maintaining vigilant awareness of their surroundings. The Jeep rounded a bend in the mountain road, and Morgan immediately tensed. Ahead, blocking the narrow two-lane highway, were three motorcycles and a black SUV. Even through the misty rain, the Iron Wolves insignia was clearly visible on the riders' leather jackets. Morgan assessed the situation in seconds. The positioning was deliberate, a classic ambush setup. The motorcycles were angled to prevent passage, and the SUV was positioned to block any attempt to reverse and escape. The location had been chosen carefully. No cell service, no nearby homes, steep embankments on both sides of the road. She reduced speed gradually, not wanting to alert the waiting men that she had recognized the trap. Beside her, Emma stirred. "Why are we slowing down?" she asked, blinking away sleep. Then she saw the roadblock and stiffened. "Is that Donovan's crew?" "Stay calm," Morgan instructed, her voice low and controlled. "Let me do the talking." As they approached, one of the motorcycle riders stepped forward, making a show of waving them down as if it were a routine traffic stop. Morgan recognized him as one of Donovan's lieutenants, a heavily tattooed man with a shaved head who went by the name Viper. Morgan stopped the Jeep about 30 feet from the roadblock, close enough to appear cooperative, far enough to maintain a reaction margin. She lowered her window as Viper approached, his hand resting suggestively near the bulge under his jacket. "Afternoon, ladies," he said with a predatory smile that revealed a gold tooth. "Roads closed due to weather damage ahead. Going to need you to turn around." Morgan glanced past him. There was no visible damage to the road, and the county would have placed official barriers if there had been. "We're just heading back to town," Morgan replied calmly. "Is there a detour we can take?" Viper's smile widened. "Not really, but I'm sure we can figure something out." His gaze shifted to Emma, lingering inappropriately. "Maybe you ladies could show some appreciation for us keeping you safe from the dangerous road ahead." Emma shrank back in her seat, genuine fear crossing her face. Morgan felt a cold anger settle in her chest, but she kept her expression neutral. "We appreciate the warning," she said. "If you'll just move your bikes, we'll turn around and find another way." "Not so fast," Viper said, stepping closer and resting his hand on the Jeep's door. "Ray wants a word with you first." He nodded toward the SUV where the tinted window was now lowering to reveal Ray Donovan's scarred face. Morgan's tactical assessment shifted. This wasn't a random harassment. It was a targeted intercept. Somehow she had attracted Donovan's attention enough to warrant direct action. "Wait here," she told Emma quietly, then louder to Viper. "Fine, I'll speak with him." As Morgan stepped out of the Jeep, she performed a final environment scan. 4 hostiles visible. Viper, 2 other motorcycle riders near their bikes, and Donovan in the SUV, potentially more inside the vehicle. Terrain disadvantageous for direct confrontation. Priority, protect the civilian. She approached the SUV with measured steps, maintaining awareness of Viper following close behind her. The rain had soaked through her flannel shirt, making the fabric cling to her skin. Morgan felt the familiar weight of her concealed weapon against her back, ready if needed. Donovan didn't emerge from the vehicle, instead beckoning her closer to his open window. It was a power play, forcing her to bend down to his level. Morgan complied, presenting the image of submission while keeping her weight balanced for rapid response if necessary. "Ms. Hayes," Donovan greeted her, his voice smoothly professional. Up close, his scar was even more pronounced, puckered and white against his tan skin. "I believe we need to clarify a few things about your activities in Harlan County." "I'm just doing my job," Morgan replied evenly, "delivering packages, helping where I can." "Yes, I heard about your heroic river rescue this morning." Donovan's tone made the compliment sound like an accusation. "Quite impressive for a delivery driver, almost as impressive as your late-night hiking skills." The reference to her surveillance activities sent a jolt of adrenaline through Morgan's system, but years of interrogation resistance training kept her expression unchanged. "I don't know what you're talking about." Donovan smiled, the expression never reaching his cold eyes. "Sheriff Walker isn't as discreet as he thinks. His patrol logs are accessible to those with the right connections." He leaned forward slightly. "So I'll ask directly, what were you doing on the Eastern Ridge last night, Ms. Hayes? Or should I call you by another name?" The question confirmed Morgan's worst fears. Her cover might be compromised. She needed to control the situation quickly. I was scouting hunting locations, she maintained, sticking to the story she'd given Walker. Turkey season opens next month. At night, in a restricted area, Donovan's skepticism was evident. With military-grade optics? Morgan shrugged. I take my hunting seriously, and I wasn't aware the area was restricted. There were no signs posted. Let's stop playing games, Donovan said, his voice hardening. We know you've been watching our operation. The question is why and for whom? Behind her, Morgan sensed Viper moving closer. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. She needed to de-escalate or prepare for confrontation. Look, if I trespassed, I apologize, she said, injecting a note of concern into her voice. I'm just trying to make a living here. I don't want any trouble. Donovan studied her for a long moment, his eyes cold and calculating. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a photograph, holding it up for her to see. Morgan's blood froze. The image showed her on the ridge, spotting scope in hand, clearly focused on the apex site. The angle suggested it had been taken from a position above and behind her. Someone had been watching her while she conducted surveillance. This doesn't look like turkey hunting to me, Donovan said softly. So I'll ask again, who are you working for? The EP, some environmental group, or something more governmental? Morgan's mind raced through options. Direct confrontation was out of the question with Emma present. Continued denial was pointless given the evidence. A partial truth might be the only viable strategy. Fine, she conceded, letting frustration show in her voice. I used to work for the Colorado Environmental Protection Agency. Old habits die hard. When I saw Apex operating outside permitted hours and bringing in equipment not listed in their environmental impact statement, I got curious. Curious enough to risk trespassing charges? Donovan asked, clearly not entirely convinced. I've seen what happens when big corporations cut corners on environmental regulations, Morgan replied, allowing genuine passion to enter her voice. They poison the water, destroy the land, then leave the locals with the cleanup bill. I wasn't going to let that happen here without at least documenting it. Donovan considered this, tapping the photograph against his armrest. An environmental crusader? How noble. His tone made it clear he didn't fully believe her, but wasn't certain enough of his suspicions to push further. Yet. Well, Ms. Hayes, consider this a friendly warning. Our project has all necessary permits and approvals. Any further curiosity on your part will be met with legal consequences. The implied threat hung in the air between them. Morgan nodded slowly, projecting reluctant acceptance while mentally adjusting her operational plans. Her cover was compromised, but not yet blown. She would need to accelerate her timeline. Understood, she said. Can we go now? I still have deliveries to complete before dark. Donovan studied her for another long moment, then nodded to Viper. Escort them back to the main road. Make sure they head toward town. As Morgan turned to leave, Donovan added, One more thing, Ms. Hayes. That rescue today, very impressive reflexes. Almost like you've had training. Military, perhaps? Morgan kept her face carefully neutral. My father was a Marine, taught me to respond quickly in emergencies. A Marine's daughter, Donovan mused. That explains some things. He smiled thinly. Drive safely. These mountain roads can be treacherous. The threat was unmistakable. Morgan returned to the Jeep, sliding behind the wheel with outward calm that belied her heightened alert status. Emma sat rigid in the passenger seat, her face pale. What did he want? She whispered as Morgan started the engine. To intimidate us, Morgan replied simply. Put your seatbelt on. Under Viper's watchful eye, Morgan executed a careful three-point turn and headed back the way they had come. In the rearview mirror, she could see two motorcycles falling in behind them, the promised escort. They're following us, Emma said, her voice tight with fear. Just to the main road, Morgan assured her, though she wasn't entirely certain herself. Try to look calm. They drove in tense silence for several miles, the motorcycles maintaining a constant distance behind them. When they reached the junction with the main highway, the riders finally peeled off, revving their engines in a final show of intimidation before disappearing back into the mountains. Only then did Emma release a shuddering breath. What is happening in this town, Morgan? First the land grabs, then these thugs showing up, now roadblocks and threats. Morgan kept her eyes on the road, mind working through implications and next steps. I don't know exactly, but I intend to find out. You're not really just a delivery driver, are you? Emma asked quietly. The question hung in the air between them. Morgan weighed her options carefully. Emma was a civilian, and involving her further could put her at risk. On the other hand, having a trusted local ally could be invaluable, especially now that Donovan was watching her directly. My background is complicated, Morgan finally said. But I promise you this, I'm not here to harm Harlan or its people. Quite the opposite. Emma studied her profile for a long moment. The way you handled that rescue today, how you just faced down those men without flinching. Who are you really, Morgan? Someone who doesn't like bullies, Morgan replied, offering a partial truth, and someone who thinks Apex is up to something far worse than environmental violations. Is there anything I can do to help? Emma asked, surprising Morgan with her directness. Morgan considered the offer carefully. Involving a civilian in an intelligence operation violated protocols, but the mission parameters were already compromised. Adaptation was necessary. Keep your eyes and ears open, she finally said, especially at the school. Kids often notice things adults miss, but be careful. Don't do anything that might attract attention. Emma nodded solemnly. I can do that. As they approached town, the lights of Harlan glowing softly through the mist, Morgan made a decision. Her cover was at risk, and she needed to accelerate her timeline. Tonight, she would make her first direct penetration of the Apex facility. I need to make one more stop before I take you home, she told Emma, turning toward the Miners' Rest Cafe. There's someone else I need to talk to. Mike Jennings was closing up when they arrived, the cafe empty of customers. He looked up in surprise as Morgan and Emma entered, immediately noting their damp, bedraggled appearance and tense expressions. You two look like you've had quite a day, he said, concern evident in his weathered face. Everything all right? Not exactly, Morgan replied, locking the door behind them and flipping the sign to closed. We need to talk, Mike, about Apex, the Iron Wolves, and what's really happening in Harlan County. The old man's expression grew serious. He gestured toward the back booth, away from the windows. I've been waiting for this conversation, he said quietly. Figured you'd come around to it eventually. As they settled into the booth, Mike poured coffee without asking, adding a splash from a bottle he kept under the counter. The whiskey's warmth was welcome after the chill of the rain and the encounter with Donovan. I know you're not just a delivery driver, Mike said without preamble, his eyes meeting Morgan's directly. Just like I wasn't just a cook in the army. Morgan felt a shift in the dynamics of the room. Mike's posture had changed subtly, his folksy demeanor giving way to something more disciplined, more alert. It was the bearing of a soldier, not a cafe owner. Rangers lead the way, she said softly, referencing the Ranger motto she had spotted in his shadow box. Mike nodded, a faint smile crossing his face. First in, last out, though I suspect your unit had a different saying. First there, Morgan replied, deciding to trust her instincts about the old veteran. Combat Control Team, Air Force Special Tactics. Emma gasped softly beside her, but Morgan kept her focus on Mike. The former Ranger nodded slowly, respect evident in his eyes. I worked with CCT operators in Desert Storm, he said. Tough as nails, all of you. So not an environmental officer then? Military intelligence, Morgan admitted, careful not to reveal her current operational status. I've been tracking a weapons smuggling operation that led me here. Mike didn't seem surprised. Figured it was something like that. Apex isn't building a resort up there. Too much security, too much nighttime activity. He leaned forward. And those Iron Wolves aren't ordinary bikers. Ex-military, most of them, but not the honorable kind. Contractors, Morgan confirmed. Private military personnel working outside the law. So what's the play? Mike asked, switching seamlessly into tactical discussion mode. You're obviously running a solo op, or at least started that way. What's your extraction plan if things go sideways? The question was astute, exactly what a veteran operator would ask. Morgan found herself respecting the old Ranger even more. Limited backup available on call, she said truthfully, but significant response time given the location. I've been focused on intelligence gathering before determining the appropriate action. And now? Mike pressed. Now Donovan knows I've been watching, Morgan admitted, which means I need to accelerate, find out exactly what they're doing up there before they can move or conceal it. Emma, who had been listening intently, finally spoke up. You're talking about going in there? Into the Apex site? That's insane. They're armed. Mike studied Morgan carefully. She's right about the risk. But I'm guessing you didn't come here just to tell us your life story. You need something. Morgan nodded, impressed by his perception. Local knowledge. Ruth mentioned old mining tunnels under the ridge where Apex is building. Tunnels that aren't on official maps. Ah, Mike said, understanding dawning. You're looking for a back door. Exactly. Mike was silent for a moment, considering. Then he stood and walked to the kitchen, returning with a rolled piece of paper that he spread across the table. It was a hand-drawn map, yellowed with age but meticulously detailed. My father was a mining engineer, he explained, kept his own records after the company started cutting corners on safety. These are the old workings under Blackridge, where Apex is building now. Morgan studied the map with professional appreciation. It showed an extensive network of tunnels, shafts, and chambers spreading throughout the mountain like the roots of an ancient tree. Most of these entrances would be collapsed or sealed by now, Mike continued, pointing to various markings. But this one here, we called it the Devil's Mouth. It was still accessible last time I checked, maybe 5 years ago. It's hidden in a grove of hemlocks on the north slope. Morgan committed the location to memory, already formulating an infiltration plan. This is exactly what I needed. You're not going alone, Mike stated flatly. It wasn't a question. This isn't your fight, Mike, Morgan countered. Either of you, she added, glancing at Emma. The old ranger's expression hardened. They threatened my business, my town, and now my friends. That makes it my fight. His voice carried the quiet authority of a man accustomed to command. Besides, you'll need someone who knows those tunnels. One wrong turn down there, and you'll never find your way out. Morgan recognized the truth in his words. The mission parameters had changed. Adaptation was necessary. Working with trusted locals might be her best option given the compressed timeline. I can help too, Emma said firmly. I know every trail on that mountain. I can keep watch, warn you if anyone is coming. Morgan studied them both, the battle-hardened veteran and the determined young teacher, and made her decision. Tonight, she said. We go in tonight while they're still dealing with the flooding from the storm. Mike nodded, a grim smile crossing his face. Just like old times. As they bent over the map, finalizing plans and exit strategies, Morgan felt a familiar tension building in her chest, the focused anticipation that preceded every mission. But this time there was something else mixed with it, a sense of purpose beyond the operational objectives. These people, this town, they had become more than just elements in her cover. They were worth protecting, worth fighting for. And whatever Apex was building in these mountains threatened not just national security, but the community that had, against all her professional caution, begun to feel like home. The thought was dangerous, Morgan knew. In her line of work, attachments were vulnerabilities, potential leverage points for enemies. The objective always came first. That's what made her effective. But as she traced the tunnel routes on Mike's map, listening to Emma's knowledge of the mountain paths and Mike's tactical suggestions, Morgan found herself caring less about protocols and more about these people who had welcomed her without knowing who she truly was. Perhaps that was what had been missing since Yemen, a connection to something beyond the mission, a reminder of what she was fighting to protect. She pushed the thought aside. Focus on the task at hand. Sentimentality could wait until the mission was complete. We move at 2200 hours, she announced, shifting into operational mode. Full dark, minimal moon. Mike and I will infiltrate through the Devil's Mouth. Emma, you'll maintain overwatch from this ridge here, with direct line of sight to both the main entrance and our extraction point. As she spoke, Morgan felt the years fall away. Not the delivery driver, not the environmental officer, but Lieutenant Colonel Morgan Hayes doing what she had been trained to do, what she was born to do. First there, always. Darkness had fully claimed the mountains by the time Morgan parked her Jeep at the trailhead, concealing it beneath a camouflage tarp she had stored for just such an operation. The rain had stopped, but mist still clung to the trees, reducing visibility and muffling sound. Ideal conditions for covert movement. She had changed into tactical gear, black moisture-wicking base layers, reinforced pants with multiple pockets, and a lightweight combat vest that held essential equipment without restricting movement. Her hair was secured tightly, face darkened with camo paint. The Sig Sauer rode in a thigh holster, joined now by a combat knife and a compact suppressed Heckler & Koch MP7, a personal defense weapon she had retrieved from her cabin's hidden armory. Mike had undergone his own transformation. Gone was the affable cafe owner, replaced by a grim-faced operator in dark clothing, moving with the economy of motion that spoke of years in combat zones. He carried an old but well-maintained M4 carbine that he had produced from a hidden compartment beneath his cafe floor. Vietnam-era tunnels taught me never to go underground unarmed, he had explained simply. Emma had reluctantly agreed to remain at an observation post above the Devil's Mouth entrance, equipped with night vision binoculars and an encrypted radio that Morgan had programmed. Her role was to warn them of any approach and to call for help if they didn't return by dawn. Remember, no heroics, Morgan had instructed her firmly. If something goes wrong, call Sheriff Walker and give him these coordinates, then get somewhere safe. Now, as they moved silently through the forest, Morgan felt the familiar mental shift that preceded combat operations. Her senses heightening, awareness expanding, thoughts becoming crystalline in their clarity. Beside her, Mike moved with surprising agility for his age, his ranger training evident in every careful step. They communicated with hand signals, unnecessary words abandoned. 20 minutes of careful navigation brought them to the hemlock grove Mike had identified. The trees stood like ancient sentinels, their drooping branches creating a natural screen. Mike pointed to a depression between two massive root systems. At first glance, it appeared to be nothing more than a shadow among shadows. But as Morgan approached, she saw that it was the entrance to a narrow shaft, descending steeply into the earth. Devil's Mouth, Mike whispered, his voice barely audible. Miners named it that because once you went in, the devil might never let you out again. Morgan activated her tactical headlamp on its lowest setting and scanned the entrance. The shaft was reinforced with old timber supports, many rotted with age but still holding. A rusty metal ladder descended into darkness. "I'll go first," she said, securing her weapon across her back. "Test the ladder's strength." Mike nodded, taking up a security position as Morgan began her descent. The ladder creaked ominously but held her weight. 20 feet down, the shaft opened into a horizontal tunnel tall enough to stand in, its walls supported by a combination of natural rock pillars and man-made timber braces. Morgan signaled for Mike to follow, sweeping her light across the tunnel as she secured the immediate area. The air was cool and damp, carrying the mineral scent of earth and the faint tang of old coal. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness, the sound echoing softly. Once Mike joined her, they consulted the map by the dim red light of a tactical flashlight. "We're here," Mike indicated, his weathered finger pointing to a spot on the northern edge of the tunnel system. "Apex is building mainly above this section." He traced a path through a complex intersection of tunnels. "But based on what you've described, I'm betting their main operation is centered around the old main shaft here." The main shaft was a large chamber near the center of the mountain, where multiple tunnels converged. It had been the primary access point for the mining operation decades ago, large enough to accommodate heavy equipment. "Makes sense," Morgan agreed. "How long to reach it?" 30 minutes if these tunnels are still clear, Mike estimated. Longer if we have to detour around cave-ins. They moved deeper into the mountain, following the ghostly outlines of old rail tracks that had once carried coal carts. Morgan took point, her weapon ready, while Mike covered their rear, both of them alert for any sign of recent activity. They had been moving for perhaps 15 minutes when Morgan froze, raising a fist in the universal signal to halt. Ahead, where there should have been only darkness, a faint glow reflected off the tunnel wall around a bend. Artificial light. Someone was in the tunnel system. Morgan and Mike exchanged glances, communicating silently. Mike pointed to a narrow side passage, barely visible in the shadows. An alternate route. Morgan nodded and they diverted, moving with heightened caution. The side passage was cramped, forcing them to crouch as they progressed. It snaked through the mountain, occasionally intersecting larger tunnels that they carefully checked before crossing. The route was adding time to their approach, but avoiding detection was worth the delay. After navigating this labyrinth for another 20 minutes, they detected a change in the air, a subtle increase in circulation, carrying with it the faint sounds of machinery and voices. They were nearing the main shaft. The tunnel they were following suddenly opened onto a metal catwalk that clung to the wall of an enormous cavern. Morgan immediately doused her light and signaled Mike to do the same, both of them pressing against the rock wall, becoming one with the shadows. What they saw below stole the breath from Morgan's lungs. The old mining chamber had been transformed. The floor, once rough-hewn rock, was now smooth concrete. Powerful LED lights hung from the high ceiling, illuminating a scene that belonged in a military installation, not the heart of a Kentucky mountain. Workers in coveralls moved purposefully among stacks of equipment and supplies. Armed guards in tactical gear patrolled the perimeter, their weapons and stance unmistakably professional. But it was the center of the chamber that drew Morgan's focused attention. There, partially assembled, stood what appeared to be a sophisticated communications array. Multiple satellite dishes were positioned beneath a section of the ceiling that had been cut away, presumably to allow transmission once fully extended. Surrounding this were racks of advanced electronics, server banks, and what Morgan recognized with a chill as military-grade encryption equipment. This was no eco-resort. This was a command center. Mike tapped her shoulder and pointed to their right, where the catwalk continued around the perimeter of the cavern. Morgan nodded, understanding his intent. They needed a better vantage point and, potentially, to get close enough to gather intelligence on the specific purpose of the facility. Moving with exquisite care, they edged along the catwalk, staying in the shadows beyond the reach of the lights below. Years of covert operations had taught Morgan the art of invisible movement, placing each foot with deliberate precision, controlling her breathing, making herself part of the environment rather than an intruder within it. They reached a juncture where a smaller chamber branched off from the main cavern. This space had been converted into what appeared to be an office, with computers, maps on the walls, and a large conference table. Through the open doorway, Morgan could see Ray Donovan engaged in intense conversation with Lucas Reed and two other men in expensive suits. Morgan signaled to Mike to hold position as she edged closer, straining to hear their conversation over the ambient noise of the main chamber. "Timeline has been accelerated," Reed was saying, his manicured finger tapping a calendar on the wall. "Washington wants the system operational before the summit." "My men are working double shifts already," Donovan replied, his scarred face tense with contained anger. "The flooding didn't help. We lost access to the north entrance for most of today." "That's your problem to solve," one of the suited men said dismissively. "The secretary expects results, not excuses." Morgan felt her pulse quicken. The secretary? This had government connections, but something felt wrong. The secrecy, the use of mercenaries, the illegal land acquisitions. This bore the hallmarks of a rogue operation, not an officially sanctioned project. "And what about our local problem?" Reed asked, his voice lowering. "The Hayes woman?" Donovan's expression darkened. "Being handled. Her background check came back suspiciously clean. Too clean. You think she's government? Maybe, or private security, industrial espionage. Either way, she's watching us, which means someone knows something." Donovan tapped his fingers on the table. "I've got men tracking her movements. If she makes one wrong step, we'll bring her in for a more thorough conversation." The threat in his voice was unmistakable. Morgan's mission timeline had just shortened dramatically. A sudden commotion from the main chamber drew everyone's attention. A guard was approaching rapidly, his posture conveying urgency. "Sir," he addressed Donovan, "perimeter sensors just picked up movement in your entrance 3. Could be animals, but protocol requires investigation." Donovan nodded sharply. "Take a team, full tactical, live ammunition. If it's just deer, fine. If not..." He left the implication hanging. Morgan and Mike exchanged glances. Entrance 3 could be any of several access points, including possibly the Devil's Mouth where Emma was stationed nearby. They needed to complete their reconnaissance and extract immediately. As the group in the office mobilized, Morgan and Mike continued around the catwalk, now moving with greater urgency balanced against the need for stealth. They reached a position overlooking what appeared to be a weapons cache, crates of ammunition, racks of assault rifles, and several cases that Morgan recognized with alarm as containing portable surface-to-air missile systems. This was far beyond a simple illegal operation. This was the infrastructure for a major attack. Mike pointed to a laptop connected to the weapons inventory system, left momentarily unattended as guards responded to the perimeter alert. Morgan nodded, understanding immediately. Intelligence was their primary objective, and that computer might contain critical information. They descended a metal ladder to the chamber floor, using the stacks of equipment as cover. Morgan moved to the laptop while Mike provided security, his experienced eyes constantly scanning for threats. Working quickly, Morgan inserted a specialized thumb drive containing data extraction software developed by military intelligence. The program began copying the hard drive contents immediately, bypassing standard security protocols. While the download progressed, Morgan examined the nearby crates, memorizing serial numbers and manufacturer codes. Her trained eye identified equipment from various international sources, some from countries not allied with the United States. The operation had global connections. A soft beep indicated the download was complete. Morgan pocketed the thumb drive and signaled to Mike that it was time to withdraw. They had what they came for. Their exit route took them past a different section of the facility, where Morgan noticed something that made her blood run cold. Drone components. Not commercial models, but military-grade attack drones, capable of carrying significant weapons payloads. The pieces were being assembled by technicians working under bright spotlights. Suddenly, an alarm blared throughout the cavern. Red warning lights began to flash, and a voice over the PA system announced, "Security breach in Sector 4. All personnel to alert status." Repeat, security breach in Sector 4. Morgan and Mike exchanged grim glances. Their presence had been detected, or perhaps Emma had been discovered. Either way, their extraction had just become significantly more complicated. "This way," Mike whispered, gesturing toward a narrow service tunnel that wasn't on their original route. "Maintenance shaft. Might get us out behind their perimeter." They slipped into the tunnel just as armed security teams began flooding the main chamber. The passage was tight, forcing them to move in a crouched position, their progress painfully slow, given the urgency of the situation. After several tense minutes, they reached a junction where the maintenance tunnel intersected with a larger mining passage. As they paused to consult Mike's mental map, voices echoed from somewhere ahead. A search team closing in. "Alternative?" Morgan whispered. Mike pointed upward. Above them, barely visible in the gloom, was a ventilation shaft. A tight squeeze, but potentially their only option. Morgan went first, pulling herself up with the strength built through years of special operations training. The shaft was narrow, lined with decades of coal dust that threatened to loosen and give away their position. Every movement had to be controlled, deliberate. Mike followed, his aged body protesting, but his ranger training still evident in his disciplined movements. They climbed in silence, the sounds of the search party growing more distant below them. The ventilation shaft angled upward, then horizontally, then upward again through the mountain's interior. After what felt like an eternity of confined crawling, Morgan detected fresh air. They were nearing an exit point. The shaft ended in a rusted grate partially hidden by undergrowth. Morgan tested it carefully, finding it loose enough to remove without tools. She emerged first, scanning the surroundings with her weapon ready, then signaled Mike to follow. They had surfaced in a densely wooded area on the eastern slope of the mountain, well away from the main apex construction site. In the distance, emergency lights flashed as security teams deployed across the property. "We need to move," Morgan whispered. "Link up with Emma and extract before they expand the search perimeter." Mike nodded, already oriented despite the unfamiliar exit point. "This way to the Devil's Mouth, about half a mile northwest." They moved through the forest with practiced stealth, avoiding the beams of searchlights that occasionally swept through the trees. The night vision goggles Morgan had brought proved invaluable, allowing them to navigate the difficult terrain without light sources that might give away their position. They were within 100 yards of their planned extraction point when the sound of voices ahead froze them in place. Morgan raised a fist, and both dropped immediately to prone positions, becoming one with the forest floor. Through her night vision, Morgan could make out 3 armed men moving methodically through the trees, sweeping the area with practiced precision. Their tactical gear and weapon discipline confirmed her earlier assessment. These weren't security guards but military-trained operators. The search team was between them and their extraction point, cutting off direct access to where Emma should be waiting. Morgan signaled to Mike that they would need to circle around adding precious minutes to their increasingly dangerous situation. As they began their detour, a radio on one of the searchers crackled to life. All teams be advised, female subject apprehended near north entrance. Proceeding with interrogation. Continue search for additional intruders. Morgan's heart seized. Emma. They had Emma. Mike's expression darkened with the same realization. He leaned close, his voice barely a breath. New mission? The question didn't require elaboration. They could continue their extraction with the vital intelligence they had gathered, or they could attempt a rescue. The former was the textbook correct choice. The latter was what neither of them could live with. New mission, Morgan confirmed, her mind already formulating approach vectors and assault options. Non-negotiable. Mike's grim smile reflected his approval. Figured you'd say that. Old mining office, north side, most likely detention point. They altered course, moving parallel to the search teams but staying well beyond visual range. Years of special operations experience guided Morgan's every decision. When to move, when to freeze, how to use terrain and shadow to maximum advantage. As they approached the northern perimeter of the Apex property, the old mining office came into view. The small, weathered building sat apart from the main construction, its windows now glowing with light. Two armed guards stood at the entrance, while a black SUV was parked nearby. Morgan studied the situation through her tactical scope. The guards' positioning, the surrounding terrain, the limited access points, all presented a significant challenge for a two-person rescue operation. Direct assault is suicide, Mike whispered, having reached the same conclusion. Agreed, Morgan replied. We need a diversion. Mike gestured towards several pieces of heavy construction equipment parked about 100 yards from the office. Fuel tanks, C4? Morgan nodded, reaching into her tactical vest for the small amount of plastic explosive she had brought as a contingency. Not enough for major demolition, but sufficient to create the diversion they needed. I'll place the charges, she said. When they detonate, you take the guard on the left. I'll take right. Breach, locate, extract. Questions? Mike shook his head, just like old times. On my signal, 3 minutes. Morgan moved through the shadows like a ghost, years of infiltration training evident in every silent step. She reached the construction equipment undetected, quickly placing and arming the small explosive charges on the fuel tanks of 2 excavators. The detonators were set to a 3-minute delay, giving her time to return to position. When the first explosion tore through the night, it was immediately followed by a second, creating a spectacular fireball that illuminated the entire northern section of the property. Alarms blared across the Apex site as emergency protocols activated. The guards at the mining office reacted predictably, their attention drawn to the flames and confusion. That split second of distraction was all Morgan and Mike needed. They moved simultaneously, closing the distance to the guards with practiced efficiency. Morgan's target never saw her coming. A strike to the throat, followed by a precision blow to the temple, and he crumpled unconscious before he could raise his weapon. Mike had dispatched his opponent with similar efficiency, the decades falling away as muscle memory took over. They secured the unconscious guards with zip ties and dragged them into the surrounding vegetation, out of immediate sight. Morgan took point as they entered the building, her suppressed MP7 leading the way. The interior was sparse, a few desks, filing cabinets, a small kitchenette. At the rear, a door stood closed, light visible beneath it. They approached silently, positioning themselves on either side. Morgan held up 3 fingers, counting down. On 0, Mike kicked the door open and Morgan swept in, weapon ready. Emma sat tied to a chair, her face pale but defiant. Before her stood Ray Donovan, his scarred face twisted with anger. A single guard stood by the wall, his hand already moving toward his holster as the door burst open. Morgan's first shot took him in the shoulder, a non-lethal wound by design. As he fell, Mike was already moving to secure him, kicking away his weapon and applying restraints. Donovan reacted with the speed of a trained operative, drawing a concealed weapon from beneath his jacket. But Morgan had anticipated this, her MP7 already trained center mass. Don't, she said simply, her voice carrying the absolute certainty of someone who had faced this moment many times before. Donovan froze, his cold eyes calculating odds and outcomes. After a tense moment, he slowly lowered his weapon. Military, he said, a statement rather than a question, as he studied Morgan's stance and the absolute steadiness of her aim. Not environmental officer, not delivery driver. Which agency? The one you don't want to cross, Morgan replied coolly. Mike, get Emma out. As Mike moved to untie Emma, Donovan's lips curved in a mirthless smile. You have no idea what you've stumbled into, whoever you are. This operation has protection at the highest levels. Is that why you're using mercenaries instead of official personnel? Morgan countered. Why you're threatening civilians and operating from a hidden base? Doesn't look like sanctioned government work to me. A flash of something, perhaps respect, crossed Donovan's scarred face. Perceptive, but irrelevant. You won't make it off this mountain alive. My men are already converging on this position. As if to emphasize his point, radio chatter increased from the device on the wounded guard's belt. Search teams were indeed responding to the explosion and the lack of communication from the mining office. We need to move, Mike said urgently, supporting Emma, who was unsteady but conscious. Morgan assessed their options with cold precision. They had minutes, perhaps less, before they would be overwhelmed by superior numbers. On your knees, hands behind your head, she ordered Donovan, who complied with the deliberate movements of someone familiar with tactical situations. You should just shoot me, he said conversationally. It would be simpler. Not my style, Morgan replied, retrieving zip ties from her vest. As she secured Donovan's hands, she leaned close to his ear. But if any harm comes to the people of this town because of your operation, I'll make a special exception for you. The threat wasn't empty, and Donovan knew it. Something in Morgan's eyes, the absolute certainty of someone who had killed before and would do so again if necessary, made him believe her completely. With Donovan secured, Morgan turned to Emma. Can you walk? The teacher nodded, her face pale but determined. They didn't hurt me, just scared me. Good. Stay between us. Move only when we tell you. Stop when we signal. Understand? Emma nodded again, her eyes wide but resolute. Morgan checked her tactical watch. The diversion had bought them perhaps 5 minutes, 3 of which were already gone. Their extraction route to the Devil's Mouth was likely compromised, given Emma's capture there. Alternative exit? She asked Mike. The former ranger considered for a moment. Creek bed, east side. Flash flood carved a new route last spring. Too narrow for vehicles to follow. Morgan nodded. It would have to do. She turned to Donovan one final time. We're leaving now. If your men pursue us, they'll find you dead. If they let us go, they'll find you alive. Your call. Donovan's scarred face remained impassive, but he gave a slight nod. I'll take door number 2, but this isn't over. Count on it, Morgan replied. She retrieved the thumb drive from her pocket and held it up for Donovan to see. Everything on your server is now compromised. Whatever you're planning, whatever protection you think you have, it's all exposed. My advice? Run, before your powerful friends decide you're a liability. Something flickered in Donovan's eyes, the first hint of genuine concern. Morgan had struck a nerve. Whatever operation they were running, exposure was its greatest vulnerability. With Mike leading and Morgan covering their rear, they exited the mining office into the chaos of the Apex compound. The diversionary explosion had done its job. Emergency vehicles and security personnel were concentrated around the burning equipment, creating a gap in the perimeter exactly where they needed it. They moved through the shadows at the edge of the cleared area, Emma keeping pace admirably despite her ordeal. Years of hiking these mountains had given her an endurance that served her well now. The creek bed Mike had mentioned appeared ahead, a rocky gash in the mountainside where spring floods had carved a new path through the forest. They descended into it, using the steep banks as cover. 2 miles downstream, Mike whispered. Joins with Wilson Creek near the old Harrison place. My truck's parked a 1/4 mile from there. Morgan nodded, mentally calculating their extraction timeline. If Donovan kept his word, they had perhaps a 15-minute head start before someone found him and reorganized the search. Enough time if they maintained their pace. They moved through the darkness with grim determination, the sounds of pursuit fading behind them. Emma stumbled occasionally on the uneven ground but recovered quickly, her fear giving way to focused resolve. After 40 minutes of punishing travel through the rocky creek bed, they reached the junction with Wilson Creek. Mike's old pickup truck, concealed beneath a camouflage tarp much like Morgan had done with her Jeep, waited exactly where he had promised. Only when they were miles away, on a back road that wound down toward the valley, did any of them speak. "What was that place?" Emma asked, her voice small but stern. "What are they building up there?" Morgan exchanged a glance with Mike in the rearview mirror. The former ranger gave a slight nod. Emma had earned the truth, or at least as much of it as they could safely share. "Some kind of communications array," Morgan replied. "Military grade, along with weapons that shouldn't be there." "But why here? Why Harlan?" "Strategic location," Mike explained. "That ridge has line of sight to 3 states. Perfect for a relay station or command center. And remote enough that few would notice unusual activity." Emma processed this, her teacher's mind connecting dots. The land purchases, the threats, they needed to control the entire area. "But for what?" Morgan's expression darkened. "That's what we need to find out. The equipment I saw suggests something far more dangerous than a simple black market operation." She held up the thumb drive. "And hopefully the answers are on here." The truck rumbled across an old iron bridge, the same one where Morgan had performed the river rescue earlier that day, a lifetime ago it seemed now. The events had accelerated far faster than she had anticipated when she first arrived in Harlan. And 9 months before, her cover was effectively blown. Donovan had seen her face, witnessed her combat capabilities. The careful persona of Morgan Hayes, delivery driver, could no longer be maintained. "I need to report in," she said as they approached the outskirts of town. "And you two need to get somewhere safe. Donovan won't take this humiliation lightly." "My cabin," Mike offered. "Off-grid, defensible position, stock supplies. Been my bug-out location for years." Morgan nodded. It would have to do until she could arrange proper extraction for the civilians. "Emma, do you have family who might be targeted?" The teacher shook her head. "Just my grandmother in Pine Ridge. Should I get her?" "Yes, Mike, can you handle that? I need to transmit this intelligence immediately." The former ranger nodded. "Drop us at my cafe. I've got a vehicle stashed behind it. We'll collect Ruth and be at the cabin before dawn." The plan settled, they drove the rest of the way in tense silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Morgan mentally composed her report, knowing that what she had discovered would escalate this from a simple reconnaissance mission to a major national security operation. When they reached the darkened cafe, Morgan transferred to her own Jeep, which Mike had collected earlier. 24 hours, she told them. "Stay dark, stay armed. I'll contact you when I have a clearer picture of what we're dealing with." Emma, still processing the night's events, surprised Morgan by pulling her into a quick, fierce hug. "Thank you," she whispered, "for coming back for me." The simple gratitude struck Morgan more deeply than she had expected. For years, her operations had been abstract, protecting national interests, preventing potential threats. Tonight had been immediate and personal. These weren't just assets or contacts. They were people she had come to care about. "Always," she replied softly, then stepped back, resuming her professional demeanor. "Remember 24 hours. No contact with anyone else. No phones. No social media." Mike gave her a crisp nod, one soldier to another. "Watch your six. Donovan strikes me as the vengeful type." "I'm counting on it," Morgan replied with grim determination. "Sometimes the best way to expose a snake is to make it strike." As she drove toward her cabin, Morgan's mind was already shifting into strategic analysis mode. The communication array, the weapons cache, the reference to the secretary, and a timeline connected to some summit, it all pointed to a planned operation with significant political implications. The thumb drive in her pocket might contain the key to unraveling it all. But first, she needed to secure her position and establish a defensible perimeter. Donovan had seen her capabilities now, which meant his approach would change. No more subtle intimidation or threats. Whatever came next would be direct and lethal. Morgan Hayes, or rather Lieutenant Colonel Morgan Hayes, USF Special Tactics Command, detached to Defense Intelligence Agency, welcomed the clarity that came with the dropping of pretense. After months of careful cover maintenance, the straightforward language of combat would be almost refreshing. As her cabin came into view, she noticed immediately that something was wrong. The security lights she always left on were dark. The passive infrared sensors embedded in her driveway should have activated exterior illumination upon her approach. Morgan didn't slow or show any sign that she had detected the ambush. Instead, she continued up the driveway at the same speed, her mind calculating angles and options. 3, perhaps 4 hostiles, based on the disruption pattern of the security system. Likely positioned for crossfire, standard tactical approach for a residence interdiction. She stopped the Jeep exactly where she normally would, killed the engine, and reached for her bag as if preparing to exit. Through the vehicle's windows, she could see nothing amiss in the darkness surrounding her cabin. But her instincts, honed through years of combat situations, screamed danger. Morgan reached beneath the dashboard, activating a switch that would not exist in a normal civilian vehicle. The resulting electromagnetic pulse was localized but effective, temporarily disabling any electronic devices within 50 feet, including any communication equipment her would-be ambushers might be using. In the same motion, she drew her sidearm and rolled from the Jeep, using its bulk as cover. The first shot came a split second later, splintering the driver's side window she had just vacated. "Target mobile!" a voice hissed from the darkness to her right. Morgan identified the position instantly and returned fire. 2 precise shots that resulted in a grunt of pain and the thud of a body hitting the ground. She moved immediately, knowing that maintaining position would make her vulnerable. Years of close-quarters combat training guided her actions as she circled away from the Jeep, using the terrain and shadows to her advantage. A muzzle flash from near the cabin's front porch revealed another shooter. Morgan dropped to one knee, steadied her aim, and fired twice. The second shot found its mark, and the figure crumpled. "She's got night vision," another voice called out, a tactical error that gave away the speaker's position behind a storage shed. Morgan didn't have night vision equipment at that moment, but she allowed her opponents to believe she did. The misconception would force them to adjust their tactics, creating opportunities she could exploit. A burst of automatic fire tore through the space she had occupied seconds before, but Morgan was already moving, circling behind the shed. The shooter, focused on where he thought she was, never sensed her approach until it was too late. A swift strike to the back of the neck with the butt of her pistol dropped him unconscious. Morgan paused, listening intently. 3 hostiles neutralized. Had there been a fourth, or had her initial assessment been incorrect? The answer came in the form of a voice, calm, controlled, and chillingly familiar. "Impressive, Miss Hayes. Or should I say, Lieutenant Colonel Hayes." Ray Donovan stepped from the shadows near her cabin's back door, his scarred face illuminated by the moonlight that had finally broken through the clouds. He held a pistol pointed not at Morgan, but at the ground, a gesture of temporary truce. "You escaped quickly," Morgan observed, her own weapon trained unwaveringly on his chest. "Or was that not you we left tied up?" Donovan's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Let's just say I maintain body doubles for high-risk situations. A lesson learned in Yemen." The reference confirmed what Morgan had already suspected. Donovan had recognized her, not just as military, but specifically from past operations. The question was, from which side? "Yemen," she repeated carefully. "Interesting reference point." "Operation Sandstorm," Donovan elaborated. "You led the CCT element supporting the SEAL extraction of the ambassador's staff. I was CIA liaison for that operation." The mission had been classified, which meant Donovan had indeed been intelligence community. At some point, the pieces suddenly clicked into place. The intelligence officer with Ranger tabs, whose face she never saw clearly. The one who had changed the extraction coordinates. "You were the handler who diverted our evac," Morgan said, her voice dangerously soft. "The one who sent us into that ambush." Something flickered across Donovan's face, not quite guilt, but acknowledgement. Necessary sacrifice. The extraction was compromised. Someone had to draw enemy fire. 4 good operators died that day, Morgan replied, her weapon never wavering, and you disappeared from the theater right after. "Reassigned," Donovan said with a dismissive wave. "Or that's what they told everyone. In reality, I was recruited for a deeper operation, one with real potential to change things." "What operation? By whom?" Donovan's laugh held no humor. "Come now, Colonel, you know how this works. Compartmentalization. Need to know, the deeper you go, the fewer people know the full picture." He gestured vaguely with his free hand. "Countries betray their operatives. Agencies disavow missions gone wrong. Loyalties evolve. Is that what happened to you? Your loyalty evolved into working with arms dealers and threatening civilians? Donovan's expression hardened. You have no idea what you've stumbled into, Hayes. This operation goes higher than you can imagine. The Secretary of Defense himself signed the authorization. Morgan's tactical mind processed this claim instantly. If true, it suggested a black operation with official sanction. But the methods, the civilian intimidation, the use of mercenaries rather than military personnel, all pointed to something outside normal channels. Then why the shell companies? Why Apex development instead of a military installation? Why the pressure tactics on local landowners? She kept her weapon steady, giving no indication of the rapid calculations happening behind her calm exterior. Plausible deniability, Donovan replied with a shrug. Standard protocol for sensitive domestic operations. You know how it works. I know that legitimate operations don't involve threatening teachers or intimidating elderly landowners, Morgan countered. Whatever you're building up there, it's not sanctioned, not officially. Donovan studied her for a long moment, his scarred face unreadable in the moonlight. You always were perceptive. It's what made you valuable in the field. He sighed, a sound that carried genuine regret, which makes this situation particularly unfortunate. The subtle shift in his stance was all the warning Morgan needed. She dove sideways as Donovan raised his weapon, his shot passing through the space she had occupied a split second before. Morgan returned fire as she rolled. Two precise shots that would have found their mark had Donovan not also moved with the practiced reflexes of a trained operative. They were evenly matched, both with extensive combat experience, both intimately familiar with the dance of death that was close quarters combat. She took cover behind a massive oak tree as Donovan fired again, the bullet embedding itself in the ancient wood. Morgan used the moment to assess her surroundings, identifying potential advantages and hazards. You can't win this, Hayes, Donovan called out, his voice echoing among the trees. Even if you take me down, the operation continues. The timeline is fixed. By this time next week, everything changes. What's the target? Morgan demanded, using his monologue to pinpoint his position, circling to her left, using the cabin's shadow for cover. Donovan's laugh held no humor. You think I'd tell you that? I respect your abilities too much. Morgan moved silently, circling in the opposite direction to create an intercept point. The drone components I saw, they're not for surveillance, are they? You're planning an attack. I'm planning to save this country from itself, Donovan replied, an edge of fanaticism entering his voice for the first time. Sometimes the system needs a reset, a shock to break through the corruption. The pieces clicked into place in Morgan's so mind, a domestic terrorist operation disguised as a black government project, using stolen or illegally purchased military equipment. The target would be high value, symbolic, something that would create maximum political impact. The summit, she said aloud, remembering Reed's words from the underground facility. That's your target, the leadership summit in D.C. next week. Donovan's momentary silence confirmed her deduction. The upcoming international summit would bring together heads of state from 12 nations, including the President of the United States, a perfect target for someone seeking to reset the system. You always were too smart for your own good, Donovan finally responded, his voice closer now. He was closing the distance, preparing for a final confrontation. Morgan calculated her options. She could attempt to take Donovan alive, secure potentially crucial intelligence about the planned attack. But doing so would increase her own risk significantly. The thumb drive in her pocket already contained vital information that needed to reach her superiors immediately. The mission came first, always. Morgan made her decision. From her tactical vest, she retrieved a small cylindrical object, a military-grade flashbang grenade. With practiced precision, she removed the pin and threw it in a high arc toward Donovan's last known position. The explosion of light and sound shattered the night stillness. Even with her eyes closed and the ears partially protected, the concussive force was disorienting. For Donovan, directly in its path, the effect would be temporarily debilitating. Morgan moved immediately, not toward Donovan, but toward her cabin's rear entrance. She had a go-bag prepared, standard procedure for deep cover operations, containing emergency supplies, alternate identity documents, and communications equipment. Inside, she moved with practiced efficiency, retrieving the bag from its hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. The thumb drive with the Apex server data joined her backup weapon and additional ammunition inside the bag. Through the window, she could see Donovan recovering, staggering but still mobile, his weapon raised as he approached the cabin. Morgan exited through a concealed hatch that led to a storm cellar, and from there to a tunnel that extended 20 yards into the surrounding forest, an escape route she had prepared within her first week of taking residence. By the time Donovan breached the cabin, Morgan was already a quarter-mile away, moving silently through the forest toward her secondary extraction point. The encounter had confirmed her worst fears, a domestic terror plot with potential intelligence community connections, targeting the highest levels of government. The rural Kentucky night enveloped her as she navigated by starlight, her steps sure despite the rough terrain. Behind her, she knew Donovan would be organizing a search, but she had the advantage of extensive preparation and intimate knowledge of the area. As she reached the ridge that would take her to the extraction point, Morgan activated her emergency satellite communicator, a device reserved for only the most critical situations. The message she sent was brief but would trigger an immediate response. Imminent domestic threat, POTUS targeted, compromised intelligence assets involved, requesting immediate extraction and strike team deployment. Maverick authentication code Sierra Tango 790. The response came within minutes. A single line of text that confirmed her worst fears and steeled her resolve. Authentication confirmed. Assets deploying. Maintain position. Eliminate immediate threats at your discretion. Archangel inbound. Archangel was the code name for the counterterrorism rapid response team, elite operators from across military and intelligence services, deployed only in cases of imminent threats to national security. Their activation confirmed that her superiors recognized the severity of the situation. Morgan checked her weapon, her expression hardening with grim determination. For 9 months, she had maintained her cover, becoming part of the community, forming connections she had never intended to make. Now those people, Mike, Emma, Ruth, the entire town of Harlan, were in danger from Donovan and whatever he had planned. The mission parameters had changed. This was no longer just about intelligence gathering. It was about protection, neutralization of an active threat, and possibly, though she tried not to think about it, vengeance for a community that had unwittingly accepted her as one of their own. As the first hint of dawn lightened the eastern sky, Lieutenant Colonel Morgan Hayes prepared for war. Not in some distant desert or mountain range, but here, in the heart of America, against enemies both foreign and domestic. And as she had done countless times before, she would ensure that the threat was eliminated, whatever the personal cost. Mike's off-grid cabin was everything Morgan expected from a former Ranger. Strategically positioned on high ground, multiple sight lines, defensive positions established with clear fields of fire, and enough supplies to withstand a siege. It was situated deep in a remote hollow, accessible only by a single rugged trail that could be easily monitored and defended. Morgan approached cautiously, aware that Mike would have established perimeter security. Sure enough, 50 yards from the cabin, she spotted the nearly invisible tripwire connected to a silent alarm system. She navigated around it, following the protocol they had established earlier. When she was 30 yards out, she heard the distinctive sound of a rifle bolt being drawn back. "Identify," came Mike's voice from a concealed position. "Maverick," Morgan replied with the code word they had agreed upon. "Welcome to Fort Nowhere," Mike emerged from behind a natural stone formation, M4 lowered but ready. His experienced eyes scanned her for injuries before gesturing toward the cabin. "Emma and Ruth are inside. Got a hot meal waiting." As they walked the remaining distance, Morgan updated him on her encounter with Donovan at her cabin and the confirmation that he was the CIA handler from Yemen. "Bastard's gone rogue," Mike shook his head. "Not the first time, won't be the last. The worst enemies are the ones who know your playbook." Inside the cabin, Emma and Ruth were seated at a wooden table, maps of the county spread before them. Ruth, despite her 80-plus years, had the sharp eyes and alert posture of someone half her age. She nodded to Morgan without surprise. "Figured you weren't just delivering packages," the elderly woman said matter-of-factly. "Not with those calluses on your hands." "Trigger finger doesn't lie." Morgan couldn't help but smile. Nothing got past the mountain folk, especially the elders. She's been marking all the old mining entrances they wouldn't know about, Emma explained, gesturing to the map where Ruth had been making notations with a red pencil. Good, Morgan nodded. We need every advantage. Donovan won't waste time now. He knows we have data from their system. Mike placed a steaming mug of coffee in front of Morgan. So what's the play? Your backup coming? Assets are inbound, Morgan confirmed. Codenamed Archangel, elite counterterrorism unit. But they're at least 6 hours out, maybe more depending on weather and transport availability. And Donovan's men could be here any time, Emma said, the fear in her voice controlled but present. Morgan took a long sip of coffee, letting the warmth and caffeine sharpen her already alert mind. They won't come here first. They don't know about this place. They'll start with known locations. My cabin, the cafe, Emma's house, maybe check the school. But they'll find us eventually, Ruth said, not a question, but a statement of fact. Yes, Morgan acknowledged, which is why we need to take the fight to them first. Mike raised an eyebrow. Offensive operation? With what? 4 people? 3 if you don't count Emma as a combatant? 5, Ruth interjected, pulling an old but well-maintained Winchester rifle from beside her chair. I may be old, but I can still shoot the eye out of a squirrel at 100 yards. Despite the gravity of the situation, Morgan felt a surge of appreciation for these people. This was why she did what she did, not for abstract concepts of national security, but for real people with courage and resolve. We don't engage directly, Morgan clarified, moving to the maps. We disrupt, delay, create confusion until Archangel arrives. Classic asymmetric tactics. She pointed to various locations on the map. Donovan has advantages in numbers and firepower, but we have knowledge of the terrain, local support, and they don't know exactly what information we have or who we've contacted. Mike nodded, understanding immediately. Guerrilla tactics, hit and run. Exactly. And our first target is their communications. From what I saw in their facility, they're coordinating through a centralized system. If we can disrupt that, they'll be forced to fall back on less secure methods, which Archangel can monitor once they're in range. Ruth tapped a bony finger on the map. The old Ranger Tower on Lookout Ridge, best signal spot in the county. If they're transmitting anything, they'd use that location for maximum coverage. Morgan studied the indicated spot. The topography was perfect for what she had in mind. That's our first objective. Mike, do you still have those demolition charges you mentioned earlier? The former ranger grinned. Always prepared. C4, detonators, timers, full kit, old habits. Good, we'll need them. Morgan turned to Emma. I know you want to help, but I need you to stay here with Ruth. If anything happens to us, you're the fallback. You take this, she handed over her satellite communicator, and you contact the frequency that's already programmed. Tell them everything. Emma looked like she wanted to protest but nodded reluctantly. Understood. Ruth, you're our intelligence base. Anyone approaches within half a mile of this position, you light this up. Morgan handed her a small radio with a single button. It'll alert us without giving away your position. The elderly woman took it with a firm grip. Don't you worry about us. Just stop those bastards from hurting anyone else. Morgan and Mike spent the next hour preparing their equipment and reviewing the plan. They would move out at dusk, using the cover of darkness to approach the Ranger Tower. If they could disable the communications array, it would buy precious time and throw Donovan's operation into disarray. As they worked, Morgan found herself studying these people who had become more than just covers or contacts. They had become something she had avoided for most of her career: connections, attachments, people she genuinely cared about. Professional distance had always been her doctrine. Emotional investment was a liability in her line of work. But something about Harlan, about these proud, resilient mountain people, had slipped past her defenses. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the cabin floor, Morgan and Mike performed final equipment checks. Weapons cleaned and loaded, communications tested, mission parameters reviewed. Just like old times, Mike said, checking the action on his rifle. Though I never thought I'd be running ops on American soil against American forces. They stopped being American forces when they decided to target American civilians, Morgan replied, her voice hardening. And Donovan stopped being intelligence community when he sold out to the highest bidder. Mike nodded solemnly. True enough, still doesn't sit right. Morgan understood his discomfort. For those who had served, the idea of turning against former comrades, even corrupted ones, carried a special weight. We're not the ones who crossed the line, she reminded him. We're just making sure they can't hurt innocent people. Emma approached as they prepared to leave, her face set with determination. Be careful, both of you. Always am, Mike replied with a wink, trying to lighten the mood. Morgan simply nodded, uncomfortable with goodbyes. But as they moved toward the door, Emma caught her arm. I mean it, Morgan. Come back. The simple statement carried more emotion than elaborate words could have conveyed. We will, Morgan promised, surprised by how much she wanted to keep that promise. As they slipped into the gathering darkness, Morgan felt the familiar shift in her mental state, the hyper-focused clarity that came with the combat operations. But this time, there was something else layered beneath it, something that felt dangerously like hope. Hope that when this was over, there might be something to come back to, something beyond the next mission, the next to cover identity, the next battlefield. It was a dangerous thought for someone in her profession. But as they moved silently through the Kentucky forest toward their objective, Morgan allowed herself to hold on to it, just for a moment before locking it away to focus on the task at hand. Twilight shadows stretched across Lookout Ridge as Morgan and Mike settled into position 200 yards from the Ranger Tower. Through her tactical scope, Morgan observed the makeshift communications center Apex had established. Just as Ruth had predicted, they had commandeered the old fire lookout tower, installing military-grade equipment that gleamed dully in the fading light. 4 armed guards patrolled the perimeter, moving with the disciplined precision that confirmed Morgan's assessment. These weren't ordinary security personnel, but trained operators. A diesel generator hummed steadily, powering the array of satellite dishes and transmission equipment. 2 technicians worked at consoles inside the tower's enclosed upper platform, their faces illuminated by the blue glow of multiple screens. Professional setup, Mike whispered beside her, his experienced eye noting the defensive positions and fields of fire the guards had established. Coverage overlapping, no blind spots. Mom, Morgan nodded, impressed despite herself. Donovan runs a tight operation. That's the problem with rogue intelligence. They know all the right protocols. The sight of the communication array confirmed her theory. This wasn't just a relay station. It was a command center for whatever operation Donovan had planned. The attack drones they had seen being assembled in the underground facility would need targeting data and remote control signals, all of which would pass through this tower. We go in at full dark, Morgan decided, checking her watch. 2 hours from now. That gives us time to circle around and approach from the eastern slope. Steeper terrain, but they'll have fewer sensors in that direction due to the cliff face. Mike unfolded the topographical map Ruth had provided, tracing the contour lines with a weathered finger. There's a game trail that runs about halfway up, comes within 40 yards of the tower base on the blind side. Morgan studied the route he indicated. It would be a difficult approach, near vertical in some sections, but doable for operators with their training. More importantly, it was the last route Donovan's men would expect them to take. Perfect, she agreed. Once we're in position, I'll move to place charges on the generator and communication lines. You establish overwatch from that rock outcropping. She pointed to a natural formation that would provide both cover and a clear line of sight to the tower entrance. If anything goes wrong, we abort and regroup at Position Delta. Position Delta was the emergency rendezvous point they had established, a small cave 3 miles north that offered both concealment and defendable approaches. If separated, they would make their way there independently. Mike nodded, his face grim but determined in the fading light. What's our extraction plan after we blow the tower? Archangel should be within operational range by then. We fall back to the cabin, link up with Emma and Ruth, and prepare for exfil. Once the communications array is down, Donovan's operation will be in disarray, buying us time. As darkness settled fully over the mountains, they began their circuitous approach. Moving silently through the forest, they navigated by moonlight and memory, avoiding the likely locations of perimeter sensors. Years of special operations experience guided their every step, when to move, when to freeze, how to become part of the landscape rather than intruders upon it. The eastern slope proved even more challenging than the map had suggested. Near vertical in sections, the approach required them to use climbing techniques, their weapons secured across their backs as they scaled the rocky terrain. Morgan moved with the fluid grace of someone who had trained for exactly such conditions, finding handholds where none seemed to exist, testing each foothold before committing her weight. An hour of careful climbing brought them to the game trail Mike had identified. True to his assessment, it wound its way along the mountainside, gradually ascending toward the tower's blind spot. They paused in the shadow of a massive boulder, taking a moment to rehydrate and check their equipment. "Range to target?" Morgan whispered. 80 yards to the tower base, Mike confirmed after consulting his rangefinder. Another 15 to the generator shed. Guards are maintaining standard patrol patterns, predictable rotations, fixed timing. Morgan nodded, appreciating his professional assessment. "Comms check." She activated her throat microphone, adjusting the earpiece that would allow them to communicate silently once separated. "Lima Charlie," Mike responded, military shorthand for loud and clear. With a series of hand signals, Morgan indicated their final approach plan. Mike would establish his overwatch position first, providing cover while she moved to place the demolition charges. Once the explosives were set, they would withdraw along the same route, detonating the charges only when at a safe distance. Mike gave a crisp nod of understanding, then began moving toward his designated position. Morgan watched as he faded into the darkness, impressed again by how well the former ranger had maintained his operational skills despite the decades since his active service. Age might have slowed his body slightly, but his tactical mind remained razor-sharp. When Mike's voice came through her earpiece confirming he was in position, Morgan began her own approach. Moving in 5-second bursts between points of cover, she closed the distance to the tower base. The night vision goggles she had retrieved from her emergency kit allowed her to navigate the darkness as if it were daylight, giving her a critical advantage over the guards who relied on spotlights and standard night vision equipment. The generator shed stood 20 feet from the tower base, a simple metal structure housing the diesel engine that powered the entire operation. Two thick cables ran from the shed to the tower, carrying the electricity that kept Donovan's communications array functioning. Morgan reached the shed undetected, flattening herself against its metal wall as a guard passed less than 10 feet away. She held her breath, remaining perfectly still until his footsteps faded. Then, with practiced efficiency, she retrieved the C4 explosives from her tactical vest. "Overwatch? Status?" she whispered into her microphone. "Clear," came Mike's immediate response. "You have a 90-second window before the next patrol." 90 seconds was more than enough. Morgan had placed demolition charges under far more pressing circumstances, including once while under direct fire in a Taliban stronghold. She worked quickly, molding the explosive compound against the generator's fuel line and main power junction. The detonator was set for remote activation, giving them control over the timing. With the primary charges placed, Morgan moved toward the communications cables that ran up the tower's support structure. These would be her secondary targets, ensuring that even if the generator had a backup system, the communications equipment itself would be disabled. She was halfway through placing the second charge when Mike's urgent whisper came through her earpiece. "Contact. Vehicle approaching from the south road. Lights off. Moving fast." Morgan froze, her senses immediately heightening. "Numbers?" "Single SUV, can't confirm occupants." She made a split-second decision. "Hold position. Let's see who our visitors are." Securing the partially placed charge, Morgan moved to a better vantage point, using the tower's support structure for cover. Through her night vision, she watched as a black SUV pulled to a stop 50 yards from the tower base. The vehicle's engine cut off, and the driver's door opened. Ray Donovan emerged, his scarred face unmistakable, even in the green-tinted view of the night vision goggles. He was followed by Lucas Reed and two armed men who took up security positions beside the vehicle. They were dressed for combat, tactical vests, sidearms, and what appeared to be prototype communication devices strapped to their wrists. "It's Donovan," Morgan whispered into her microphone, "plus Reed and two tangos, armed and equipped." "Orders?" Mike's voice was steady, professional. Morgan considered her options. Their mission was to disable the communications array, not engage in direct confrontation. Taking Donovan now might be satisfying, But it wouldn't stop the larger operation already in motion. Maintain course, she decided. Complete the objective. Observe only. As Donovan and Reed approached the tower entrance, Morgan continued placing her charges, now working with even greater care to avoid detection. She could hear fragments of conversation as the men passed beneath her position. Timeline moved up, Reed was saying, his voice tense. The leak compromises everything. The leak is being handled, Donovan replied coldly. Hayes won't live long enough to report what she's seen. My best team is at her cabin now. Morgan allowed herself a grim smile at that. Donovan's best team would find nothing but an empty cabin and perhaps a few surprises she had left behind for unwelcome visitors. And the assets? Reed asked. En route to the primary site, drones will launch at 0600 regardless of our status here. The secretary has already been briefed on the contingency plan. The mention of a 0600 launch sent a chill through Morgan's spine. Dawn was less than 8 hours away. Whatever attack Donovan had planned, it was imminent. She finished placing the final charge as Donovan and Reed entered the tower, the heavy metal door clanging shut behind them. With all explosives in place, Morgan began her careful withdrawal, moving back along the same path she had used for the approach. Charges set, she confirmed quietly, moving to extraction point Alpha. Roger that, Mike acknowledged, beginning withdrawal. Morgan had just reached the tree line when a sudden burst of activity at the tower caught her attention. Guards were moving with increased urgency, and floodlights snapped on, sweeping the surrounding forest. Something's wrong, she whispered. They're on alert. The answer came seconds later as an alarm blared from the tower. Through her night vision, Morgan could see Donovan emerge onto the tower's observation deck, gesturing angrily to his men below. They've been compromised, Mike's voice came through, tension evident. We need to move, now. Morgan was about to agree when the reason for the alarm became horrifyingly clear. Through her earpiece came a new voice, Emma's, breathless and terrified. Morgan, they found us. Ruth held them off, but she's hit. I got away, but they're tracking me through the forest. I don't know how long. The transmission cut off abruptly. Morgan's blood turned to ice. Somehow Donovan had located the cabin. Emma was on the run, and Ruth was wounded or worse. Mike, did you copy? She asked urgently. Affirmative, came his grim reply. Mission parameters just changed. Morgan made an instant decision. Detonate now, create maximum chaos, then head for position Bravo. I'm going after Emma. Negative, Mike countered. We stay together. Tactical doctrine. This isn't about tactics anymore. Morgan cut him off. These are our people. There was a brief pause, then, understood. Detonating in 3, 2, 1. The night erupted in a blinding flash as the charges detonated simultaneously. The generator shed disappeared in a fireball, and secondary explosions cascaded up the tower's structure as the communication equipment overloaded. Emergency lights flickered and died as the power supply was severed. In the chaos that followed, Morgan was already moving, sprinting through the forest toward the location where Emma's transmission had originated. The satellite tracker in the radio she had given the teacher was still active, showing her position 2 miles southeast, moving rapidly through difficult terrain. Emma's heading toward Devil's Mouth, Morgan realized. She's trying to lose them in the old mining tunnels. Smart girl, Mike acknowledged. I'm moving to intercept from the west. Don't wait for me. Morgan pushed herself to the physical limits as she navigated the forest at a near sprint, leaping fallen logs and scrambling up rocky inclines. Her mind calculated time and distance, estimating that Emma had perhaps a 20-minute head start on her pursuers. But they would be moving in vehicles along forest roads for part of the way, potentially cutting off her escape route. After 15 minutes of punishing pace, Morgan heard it. The sound of pursuit, men crashing through the underbrush, voices calling to each other, the occasional beam of a flashlight sweeping through the trees. They were closing in on Emma. Morgan altered her course slightly, moving to intercept the pursuit team rather than follow directly behind them. Through her night vision, she could make out 4 men moving in a search pattern, their weapons ready. They were professionals, maintaining proper spacing and communication as they tracked their prey. She needed to even the odds. Drawing her suppressed MP7, Morgan circled wide, positioning herself ahead of the rightmost pursuer. As he passed her position, she emerged from cover, wrapping her arm around his throat in a practiced chokehold. The man struggled briefly before losing consciousness, never making a sound that might alert his companions. 1 down, 3 to go. Morgan moved quickly to her next position, using the terrain to separate the remaining pursuers. The second man fell as silently as the first, a precision strike to the back of the neck, rendering him unconscious. The remaining 2 hunters, however, noticed their companion's absence. They converged, moving back to back in a defensive posture that would make approaching them far more difficult. "Jenkins? Martinez? Report!" one of them hissed into his radio. The lack of response put them on high alert. They began retreating toward more open ground, maintaining their defensive formation. Morgan couldn't risk a direct assault against their prepared position, but she couldn't let them escape either. They would simply call for reinforcements and continue the hunt. She needed a distraction. Retrieving a small device from her tactical vest, Morgan activated it and threw it 20 yards to their left. The sound simulator immediately began reproducing the noise of someone moving through undergrowth, complete with breaking twigs and rustling leaves. The pursuers took the bait, turning toward the sound and advancing cautiously. That split second of distraction was all Morgan needed. She moved like a ghost, closing the distance in 3 silent strides. The first man sensed her presence too late, turning just as her strike connected with his solar plexus. As he doubled over, gasping for breath, Morgan was already engaging the second, deflecting his rifle barrel upward as he attempted to bring it to bear. The man was good, his reactions nearly matching her own as they grappled for control of the weapon. A vicious knee strike to his midsection created momentary separation, allowing Morgan to follow with a precision blow to the temple. He crumpled immediately. The first man had recovered enough to reach for his sidearm, but Morgan was faster. A sweeping kick knocked the weapon from his hand, and a follow-up strike left him unconscious beside his companion. 4 down, but there would be more coming. Morgan retrieved her night vision goggles, which had been knocked askew during the fight, and oriented herself. Emma's tracker signal was still moving, now less than half a mile ahead. She resumed her pursuit, pushing through the burning in her muscles, focusing only on reaching the young teacher before Donovan's remaining forces could. The terrain became increasingly steep as she approached the area known as Devil's Mouth. The old mining entrance was hidden within a stand of ancient hemlocks, difficult to find even for those who knew its location. Emma had chosen her refuge well, if she could reach it. Morgan's earpiece crackled to life. "Maverick, this is Archangel Actual. Do you copy?" Her heart leaped at the transmission. The counterterrorism team had arrived in the operational area sooner than expected. "Archangel, this is Maverick. I copy. Situation critical. Civilian asset in imminent danger. Requesting immediate support." "Roger that, Maverick. QRF is inbound to your position. ETA 12 minutes. Chinooks are touching down at LZ Yankee. Main force deploying to Apex facility. QRF, Quick Reaction Force. A small team of operators detached from the main Archangel unit to provide immediate support." 12 minutes might be enough, if Emma could stay ahead of her pursuers that long. "Acknowledged, Archangel. Be advised, terrorist forces preparing drone strike. Launch scheduled for 0600. "Copy that. Intelligence received from your data extraction confirmed. Strike teams are moving to neutralize launch facilities." The knowledge that the full force of America's counterterrorism capability was now engaged should have been reassuring. But Morgan's focus remained singular. Reach Emma before Donovan's men did. As she crested a small rise, Morgan finally caught sight of her quarry. Emma was 50 yards ahead, struggling up a steep incline, clearly exhausted but still moving. And behind her, closing rapidly from a different direction, were 2 more of Donovan's men. Morgan didn't hesitate. She broke from cover, sprinting toward Emma's position. The movement caught the attention of the pursuers, who immediately changed course to intercept this new threat. "Emma," Morgan called out. "Down, now!" The teacher reacted instantly, dropping flat against the forest floor as Morgan brought her weapon up. The first pursuer fired wildly, his shots going wide as he tried to adjust his aim on the run. Morgan's return fire was precise, 2 rounds to center mass that dropped him mid-stride. The second man was more cautious, diving behind a fallen tree and returning disciplined fire that forced Morgan to take cover behind a large boulder. The exchange of gunfire echoed through the forest, shattering the night's silence. "Emma, stay down," Morgan called out. "Crawl toward me when I give covering fire." She heard a faint acknowledgement from the teacher. The opposing shooter was good, maintaining his position while keeping Morgan pinned down with well-placed shots. She needed to create an opening. From her vest, Morgan retrieved her last flashbang grenade. The non-lethal stunner would disorient her opponent long enough for Emma to reach safety. "Cover your ears and close your eyes," she shouted, then threw the grenade in a high arc that carried it behind the fallen tree. The explosion of light and sound was followed by a cry of pain and disorientation. Morgan immediately leaned out from cover, providing suppressing fire as Emma scrambled toward her position. "Keep coming," Morgan encouraged as Emma closed the distance. Just as the teacher reached her, Morgan heard a sound that turned her blood to ice, the distinctive metallic click of a grenade pin being pulled. "Down," she yelled, throwing herself over Emma as the fragmentation grenade detonated 30 feet away. Shrapnel tore through the air above them, embedding in trees and slicing through foliage. When the explosion faded, Morgan rolled to a firing position, scanning for the threat. The attacker had used the grenade as cover to change position, a professional tactic that indicated she was dealing with a highly trained operative. A flash of movement to her left caught her attention, but before she could react, another figure burst from the undergrowth. Mike, moving with surprising speed for his age, tackled the hidden assailant. The two men went down in a tangle of limbs, grappling for advantage. Morgan moved immediately to assist, but Mike was handling himself with the skill of a lifelong combatant. A series of brutal, efficient strikes left his opponent limp on the forest floor. "Figured you could use some backup," Mike said, rising to his feet with a grimace that suggested the exertion had cost him. "Perfect timing," Morgan acknowledged, then turned her attention to Emma. "Are you hurt?" The teacher shook her head, though her face was pale with shock and exhaustion. "No, but Ruth, they shot her. I don't know if she's—" "Ruth's alive," Mike interrupted. "Took a round to the shoulder, but she was conscious when I left her. Sheriff Walker is with her now." Morgan's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Walker?" Mike nodded. "Showed up right as Donovan's men were breaking in. Seems he's been keeping tabs on all of us. Man's sharper than he lets on." The revelation was unexpected but welcome. Having legitimate law enforcement involved would help with the aftermath, assuming they survived the night. "We need to move," Morgan said, helping Emma to her feet. "More of Donovan's men will be coming, and we're too exposed here." "The old mine," Emma suggested, gesturing toward the nearby stand of hemlocks. "We can lose them in the tunnels." Morgan shook her head. "Too risky. They'll just seal the entrances and trap us inside." She tapped her earpiece. "We have QRF inbound. We need to reach the extraction point and link up with them." "Extraction point is 2 miles northeast," Mike pointed out. "Rough terrain, and we've got wounded." He nodded toward Emma, who was clearly at the limits of her endurance. Morgan made a quick decision. "Change of plans. We find defensible ground and wait for extraction to come to us." She activated her emergency beacon, which would guide the QRF directly to their position. "Archangel, this is Maverick. Have civilian assets secured but require immediate evacuation. Activating beacon now." "Copy that, Maverick. QRF is vectoring to your signal. Hold position." They moved quickly to higher ground, finding a small clearing backed by a sheer rock face that eliminated one avenue of approach. Mike established a perimeter while Morgan tended to Emma, who was showing signs of shock despite her insistence that she wasn't injured. "Here," Morgan said, wrapping her tactical jacket around the shivering teacher. "This will help with the cold." Emma looked up at her, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and determination. "I'm sorry I got captured. I should have been more careful." "You did exactly right," Morgan assured her. "You stayed alive and kept moving. That's all that matters." A distant sound caught their attention, the rhythmic thump of helicopter rotors approaching from the east. The QRF was almost there, but they weren't alone in hearing it. From the forest below came new sounds, voices, movement, the metallic clicks of weapons being readied, Donovan's remaining forces converging on their position. "Company coming," Mike warned, taking up a firing position at the edge of the clearing, multiple hostiles approaching from the south and west. Morgan joined him, assessing the situation with the cold calculation of a veteran operator. They were outnumbered but had the advantage of high ground and the knowledge that reinforcements were minutes away. If they could hold out long enough, The first shots came suddenly, disciplined bursts of automatic fire that kicked up dirt at the clearing's edge. Morgan and Mike returned fire selectively, conserving ammunition while keeping the attackers at bay. "Stay down." Morgan called to Emma, who had pressed herself against the rock face, trying to make herself as small a target as possible. The exchange of gunfire intensified as more of Donovan's men joined the assault. They were attempting to surround the clearing, cutting off any possible retreat. A professional maneuver executed with the precision that confirmed Morgan's assessment. These were former special operators, men who had once served their country but now fought for whoever paid the highest price. Through her scope, Morgan caught glimpses of their attackers, moving from cover to cover, communicating with hand signals, establishing overlapping fields of fire. This wasn't a random security team. This was a kill squad sent specifically to eliminate witnesses and recover the intelligence she had stolen. "Mike, conserve ammo," she advised. "They're trying to draw us out, make us waste rounds before their main assault." The former ranger nodded, adjusting his position slightly. "I count at least 8, maybe more in reserve. Professional formation. These boys know what they're doing." Morgan checked her watch. The QRF should be visible any moment, but they might not arrive before Donovan's men launched their final push. As if reading her thoughts, a new voice cut through the night, amplified by a megaphone from somewhere in the tree line. "Lieutenant Colonel Hayes," Ray Donovan's voice, calm and controlled despite the circumstances. "I know you can hear me. Your position is surrounded, your ammunition limited. There's no need for further bloodshed." Morgan remained silent, using the distraction to scan for Donovan's position. If she could locate him... "I'm offering you a choice, Hayes," Donovan continued. "Surrender the intelligence you've gathered, and I guarantee safe passage for your civilian friends. Continue resisting, and none of you will leave this mountain alive." Mike glanced at Morgan, his expression questioning. She shook her head slightly. Donovan's offer was tactical, not genuine. The moment they surrendered the intelligence, he would eliminate all witnesses. "We hold," she whispered. "QRF is less than 2 minutes out." As if to challenge her assessment, a coordinated barrage of gunfire erupted from multiple positions, forcing them further into cover. Donovan's men were done waiting. The final assault had begun. Morgan fired methodically, each shot calculated to maximize effect while minimizing expenditure of ammunition. Beside her, Mike did the same, his decades-old training evident in every precise movement. But the attackers were closing the noose, advancing under covering fire with the discipline of veteran operators. Without reinforcements, their position would be overrun in minutes. And then, like an answer to unspoken prayer, the night lit up with new sound and fury. The distinctive bark of an M134 minigun tore through the darkness as a Black Hawk helicopter crested the ridgeline, its weapon systems engaging Donovan's forces with devastating effect. "Cavalry's here," Mike shouted over the thunderous noise. The helicopter hovered 30 feet above the clearing, its downdraft whipping through the trees as a fast rope dropped from the open door. 4 black-clad figures descended rapidly, taking up defensive positions around Morgan and her companions. "Lieutenant Colonel Hayes," the lead operator called out, his face concealed behind tactical gear and night vision equipment. "Archangel QRF, we're your ride out." Morgan had never been so glad to see fellow operators. 3 for extraction, she reported crisply. 1 civilian, priority medical evac. The QRF leader nodded, gesturing toward the helicopter. 2 of his men immediately moved to assist Emma, who seemed on the verge of collapse now that rescue had arrived. "The main Archangel force has secured the Apex facility," the leader informed her as they moved toward extraction. "Drone components recovered, multiple hostiles in custody, but Donovan wasn't there." Morgan's gaze swept the forest below, where the remnants of the attack force were retreating under the helicopter's continued suppressing fire. "He's here. Somewhere." As if summoned by her words, a final burst of gunfire erupted from the trees, not aimed at the clearing, but at the helicopter itself. Rounds pinged off the Black Hawk's armored underside, and the pilot took evasive action, temporarily suspending the extraction. "Sniper! 3 o'clock!" one of the QRF operators called out, returning fire toward the unseen threat. Morgan identified the position immediately, a rocky outcrop 200 yards away, perfectly positioned for a final desperate attack. and she had no doubt who was behind that rifle. "Get them out," she told the QRF leader, nodding toward Mike and Emma. "I'll neutralize the sniper." "Negative, Bush," the operator began, but Morgan was already moving, using the helicopter's covering fire as concealment for her approach. She heard Mike call after her, but didn't look back. This was between her and Donovan now, a final reckoning that had been building since she first arrived in Harlan 9 months ago. Morgan moved through the forest with the fluid grace of a predator, anticipating Donovan's next move. He would relocate after his initial shots, knowing she would be coming for him. But his options were limited by terrain and the helicopter's presence. A flicker of movement ahead confirmed her assessment. Donovan was changing position, moving higher up the rocky slope to maintain his advantage. But in doing so, he had sacrificed concealment for mobility. Morgan circled wide, ascending the slope from a different angle. The countless hours she had spent exploring these mountains during her cover assignment now paid dividends as she navigated the difficult terrain with confidence. She reached the upper section of the outcrop just as Donovan was settling into his new firing position. His focus was on the helicopter below, his rifle steadied against a natural rock formation. "It's over, Ray," Morgan called out, her own weapon trained center mass on his back. Donovan froze, then slowly turned, his scarred face illuminated by the distant helicopter's searchlight. Despite the circumstances, his expression remained composed, almost resigned. "Hayes," he acknowledged, "I should have known you'd come yourself." "Put the rifle down," she ordered. "It's finished. Archangel has your facility, your equipment, your personnel. The drone attack won't happen." A flicker of genuine surprise crossed Donovan's face, quickly replaced by cold calculation. "You think stopping one operation ends this? The Secretary has contingencies within contingencies. The attack will proceed with or without me." "The Secretary of Defense isn't involved," Morgan replied firmly. "We've already confirmed that. This is your operation, Ray. Your treason." Donovan's laugh was hollow. "Treason? I'm trying to save this country from itself. Sometimes the system needs to be shocked back to sanity." His eyes narrowed. "You used to understand that back in Yemen, before you became just another mindless tool following orders without question." "I follow the oath I took," Morgan countered, "to protect against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Right now, that's you." For a long moment, they stared at each other. Two operators who had once fought on the same side, now divided by choices and principles. Morgan could see the calculation in Donovan's eyes, the rapid assessment of options that every trained operative performs in crisis. "Last chance, Ray. Surrender now." Donovan's smile was cold. "You know I can't do that, Hayes." The subtle shift in his posture was all the warning Morgan needed. As Donovan moved to bring his rifle to bear, she fired, 2 precise shots that struck center mass. He staggered backward, surprise registering on his face before he collapsed against the rocks. Morgan approached cautiously, weapons still trained on his fallen form. Donovan's breathing was labored, blood spreading across his chest despite the body armor that had slowed but not stopped her rounds. "You always were the better shot," he gasped, a trickle of blood at the corner of his mouth. Morgan knelt beside him, maintaining professional distance despite their history. "Why, Ray? You were one of the best. You served with honor." Donovan's laugh turned into a wet cough. "Honor? There's no honor in what we do, Hayes, just necessary evils justified by faceless bureaucrats." His eyes found hers, suddenly intent despite his fading strength. "The Secretary may not be involved officially, but he knows, they all know. I was their deniable asset until I wasn't." "Tell me about the summit attack," Morgan pressed, sensing his time was short. "Are there other cells, other targets?" But Donovan's focus was already fading, his gaze drifting past her to the star-filled sky above. "You'll see. Sometimes you have to burn it down to save what matters." His final breath escaped in a long soon, his scarred face relaxing in death. Morgan checked for a pulse, finding none. Whatever secrets Donovan had kept died with him on that Kentucky mountainside, beneath the same stars that had witnessed their earlier operations half a world away. Morgan retrieved his weapon and any intelligence materials on his person before activating her radio. "Archangel, this is Maverick. HVT is down. Repeat, HVT is down." Copy that, Maverick. QRF has extracted your team. Ready for your pickup? Morgan took a final look at Donovan's body, feeling a complex mixture of emotions. Not regret, he had made his choices and forced her hand, but perhaps a form of mourning for the dedicated operator he had once been, before whatever darkness had turned him against the country he had sworn to protect. Ready for pickup, she confirmed. Mission complete. 3 days later, Morgan stood on the porch of Mike's Cafe, watching the sunrise paint the hills of Harlan County in shades of gold and amber. The town was quiet at this early hour, showing no outward signs of the drama that had unfolded in the surrounding mountains. The official story, carefully crafted by government agencies, described a joint federal operation against an illegal weapons manufacturing facility. Few locals questioned this narrative. They had lived with enough government interventions in coal country to know when not to ask questions. Morgan's cover as a delivery driver was officially blown, but in a way that protected both her real identity and the community that had unwittingly harbored a covert intelligence operative. As far as Harlan was concerned, Morgan Hayes had been an undercover ATF agent investigating illegal weapons trafficking. It was a cover story that allowed her to maintain the relationship she had formed without compromising national security. The bell above the cafe door jingled as Mike emerged, carrying 2 steaming mugs of coffee. His shoulder was bandaged from a wound received during the final extraction, but otherwise the former ranger seemed unaffected by their ordeal. "Thought you could use this," he said, handing her one of the mugs. "Figured it might be our last chance to enjoy my special blend before you ship out." Morgan accepted the coffee with a grateful nod. "Orders came through last night. I leave tomorrow for debriefing in Washington." And then, back to the shadows. There was no judgment in Mike's question, only understanding from someone who had lived a similar life. Morgan sipped her coffee, considering. For the first time in her career, she found herself reluctant to move on to the next assignment, the next cover identity, the next battlefield. "I don't know," she admitted. "This operation raised questions that need answers. Donovan wasn't working alone. Someone higher up was protecting his operation, maybe even directing it." Mike nodded thoughtfully. "The deeper the conspiracy, the more dangerous the investigation. Watch your 6, Colonel." "Always do." They fell into comfortable silence, watching as the town slowly came to life around them. A truck rumbled past, workers heading to what remained of the mines. A school bus made its morning rounds, picking up children for whom the events of the past days were already becoming local legend rather than frightening reality. The cafe door opened again, and Emma emerged, followed by Ruth, her arm in a sling, but her eyes as sharp as ever. The elderly woman had recovered remarkably well from her gunshot wound, displaying the same toughness that had allowed generations of mountain folk to survive hardship and challenge. "So it's true," Emma said, taking in Morgan's appearance. "You're leaving." Gone was the casual attire of a rural delivery driver. Morgan now wore the understated but unmistakable uniform of a government agent, dark suit, sensible shoes, and the subtle bulge of a service weapon beneath her jacket. "Duty calls," Morgan replied simply. Emma studied her for a long moment. "Will you come back after everything is settled?" It was a question Morgan had asked herself repeatedly over the past days. Harlan had become more than just another cover assignment. These people, Mike, Emma, Ruth, even Sheriff Walker, had fought alongside her, risked their lives for a mission they barely understood because they trusted her judgment and shared her commitment to protecting their community. "I'd like to," she answered honestly, "but it's complicated." Ruth snorted dismissively. "Life's always complicated, girl. Doesn't mean you can't make your own choices." Her weathered hand gripped Morgan's arm with surprising strength. "You've got friends here now, remember that." Friends. The word resonated in a way Morgan hadn't expected. In her world of classified missions and cover identities, genuine friendship was a luxury rarely afforded and even more rarely accepted. The sound of an approaching vehicle drew their attention. A black government SUV rolled to a stop in front of the cafe, its tinted windows concealing the occupants. Morgan's ride had arrived. "That's my cue," she said, setting down her empty mug. Mike offered his hand, which she shook firmly. "If you ever need backup again, you know where to find me." "Take care of yourself, Ranger." Ruth simply nodded, her knowing eyes communicating more than words could express. Emma, however, stepped forward and pulled Morgan into a tight embrace. "Thank you," the teacher whispered, "for everything." Morgan returned the hug, somewhat awkwardly at first, then with genuine warmth. "Stay safe, all of you." As she walked toward the waiting vehicle, Morgan felt the weight of their gazes following her. She had come to Harlan 9 months ago as Lieutenant Colonel Morgan Hayes, a covert operative on a classified mission. She was leaving as something more complex, a warrior who had found unexpected connections in the midst of danger, a professional who had allowed herself to care about the people behind the mission parameters. The SUV door opened as she approached, revealing a familiar face. Commander Sarah Wilson, her longtime handler, and one of the few people who knew all of Morgan's operational history. "Ready to go, Colonel?" Wilson asked, her expression professional, but with a hint of concern for an agent who had just completed a difficult mission. Morgan cast one final glance back at the cafe, where Mike, Emma, and Ruth still stood watching. They raised their hands in farewell. Not goodbye, she realized, but rather until next time. "Ready," Morgan confirmed, sliding into the vehicle beside her commander. As the SUV pulled away, Morgan felt a sense of certainty settle over her. This mission had ended, but the larger investigation was just beginning. Somewhere in Washington, the anonymous secretary who had supported Donovan's operation was covering his tracks, eliminating evidence, preparing contingencies. But he would make a mistake eventually, and when he did, Lieutenant Colonel Morgan Hayes would be there. The quiet professional, the shadow warrior, the delivery driver with the special ops tattoo who had proven once again why her unit's motto was "first there." Harlan County faded in the rearview mirror, but Morgan knew with unexpected clarity that she would return. Some missions weren't just about national security, they were about protecting the people and places that mattered. And Harlan, against all professional protocols and personal caution, had come to matter very much indeed. In the quiet hills of Harlan County, where ancient mountains hold their secrets close, a legend now whispers through hollers and ridges. They say a woman came among them, ordinary at first glance, yet extraordinary in her courage. A woman who, when darkness threatened their way of life, revealed herself to be something more than they could have imagined. Lieutenant Colonel Morgan Hayes arrived as a stranger carrying packages, but departed having delivered something far more valuable: safety, justice, and the reminder that true strength often wears the most unassuming disguise. The tattoo on her back wasn't just an emblem of military service, but a testament to the warrior spirit that lives within those who stand between innocence and harm's way. We all wear masks in this life, the faces we present to the world rarely revealing the full measure of who we are beneath. Sometimes it takes a moment of crisis to reveal our true selves, to force us to choose between duty and connection, between protocol and humanity. For a soldier accustomed to shadows, Harlan's sunlight offered something unexpected, a glimpse of a life where purpose and belonging might coexist, where the mission includes not just completing objectives, but protecting real people with names and faces and stories of their own. What would you sacrifice to protect the place that somehow, against all odds, began to feel like home?